He's a B-rank adventurer, with the face of a villain and the heart of a lion. In the game's story, Gray was meant to be a minor thug, just another bad guy. But fate glitched when he saved a few orphans and realized that he had to raise them as his new family. Now the man feared by all has become a father to the future hero and saint. The man meant to be forgotten became the father of legends. Because sometimes, the world's darkest face hides its brightest soul. Will his quiet love change destiny itself? Let's find out. There's no reset button in life, even if it's filled with regrets. That's why, if the protagonist had the chance, he would have lived a life without regrets. A boy and a girl, their faces terrified, knelt and begged for help. Passers-by judged the grown man. Some thought he forced the children to their knees. Some thought he was abusing them. Fear was evident on the man's face. Unexpectedly, he had become what people call a reincarnation. Sometimes, memories from his past life would surface in his mind. This world was very reminiscent of a super popular game called Vivid Fantasy. He bought the game after seeing a friend play it. He knew little about it because he hadn't even had time to unpack it. All he knew was that it was a team-based RPG. The game featured many different heroines, and the decisions he made would influence which one the protagonist would marry. This is a bright world of swords and magic. The game's hero is named Isuka. The protagonist's name is Gray. Because of his stern gaze, he is often mistaken for a bandit. He was reborn as an evil supporting character. When the children bowed deeply before the hero, he became lost in thought. He didn't know his role in the game, so he decided to become a simple adventurer. Adventurers are a noble profession. They gather daily in guilds to accept and solve various quests. And that's the essence of adventurers. Adventurers are divided by rank from E to A. Rank D starts with D, then D+. Each rank has a sub-rank in the form of minus and plus, which makes it more challenging. The B rank challenge requires completing 3 C rank quests in a row. There are preliminary challenges to increase your rank. There are a bunch of other rules, but he doesn't care. The protagonist worked hard to increase his rank. He was skilled in various magic, offensive and healing, buffs and debuffs. He wielded a sword perfectly. He was a B-rank adventurer, good at anything. The protagonist stood in front of the children with a stern expression. Passers-by were discussing whether they were trying to sell the children. Someone even called the guards. The protagonist couldn't wait for the children to stop bowing low. He thought about how people judged a book by its cover. The boy raised his head and said that he was ashamed, but he was asking the protagonist for help. He asked to heal a member of his family with the help of magic. The girl raised her head and also begged for help. The protagonist didn't understand how it had come to this. The boy told them everything that had happened. They were selling flowers on the street, and a bully laughed and rudely said that he didn't need flowers. Then the bully kicked the boy. The protagonist quickly took revenge for the offended children. He calmed them down and said that he would buy one from them. To fulfill the children's request, restoration magic was needed. The protagonist asked which of their relatives needed healing. The boy replied that they had no parents or real family. One of his friends was sick. The protagonist reflected that restoration magic could only heal wounds. Only priests could use healing magic, but it wouldn't be cheap. The children froze in a deep bow. He agreed to their request. The children asked if this was true. He replied that he wasn't sure he could cure them, but asked to be taken to the sick person. He wasn't sure the potion would work. The boy tried to negotiate payment, but the protagonist replied that the children didn't have to rush into payment. They lived in the same city, so they were sure to cross paths. There were tears in the children's eyes. The protagonist asked why they were crying. The boy replied that they were crying because an adult had decided to help them. The girls said there were no adults among them, and they couldn't do anything. The protagonist asked them to calm down and said that now he simply had to help them. The children led the hero to the house where they lived. He remembered that they hadn't had a chance to get acquainted. He introduced himself as Gray, and that he was an adventurer. The boy replied that his name was Isuka, and the girl's name was Fio. He replied that it was nice to meet him. He thought about it. Isuka? The children replied that they were also glad to meet him. It was no coincidence that this boy was the protagonist of this world. According to the villain scenario, death awaited the hero. Normally, he should avoid the protagonist, but he couldn't be sure of anything, especially what to do. Gray decided to act according to his conscience. Even if his connection with the protagonist led to his death, that was no reason not to help him. The protagonist didn't want to die. He just didn't want to live with the regret of not doing what he could. Isuka announced that they had arrived. He said he would go to the house first and explain everything to everyone. Gray agreed with him. He remained standing on the street and waited. He looked carefully at the house and thought that the children lived on the outskirts of the slums. Fio wanted to talk to the protagonist about something, but she hesitated. Gray asked, "What's wrong?" And he thought that he should have gone with Isuka. Fio burst into tears again and thanked the protagonist. Gray replied that she could thank him after he helped her family. Gray said that maybe he was a bad person who wanted to capture them and sell them into slavery, but Fio replied that he was simply listening to them. Moreover, if he were a bad person, he wouldn't have said that. Gray called Fio naive and said that she had no reason to trust him. He thought he was glad of such words. Fio looked at the protagonist and asked if she upset him. Gray replied that he wasn't angry, but just thoughtful. Fio smiled. Gray thought about why he looked upset. He'd been told this often since becoming Gray, so he wasn't surprised. He was born this way. Isuka peeked out the door and thanked Gray-san for waiting. Gray went inside. A boy, wrapped in a rag, lay on a pillow on the floor in the corner of the house. Next to him stood a basin of water and a mug. Inside the house was a girl, older than Isuka, with 2 small children. Gray thought about what their sick family member was like. Fio asked if the protagonist could cure the girl. Gray replied that he would do his best. The older girl apologized to Gray for not introducing herself. She said her name was Aria. The youngest girl was named Nina, and the middle boy was named Lutz. Aria said the sleeping girl's name was Stella, and asked for his help. Gray looked closely at the sick girl. He said his question might seem strange, but what color Stella's eyes were. Aria replied that Stella's eyes were red and very beautiful. Gray noticed that Stella had fangs instead of teeth and snow-white skin. He put all these characteristics together and realized that Stella was a vampire. Gray thought that she was most likely a half-breed, unwanted by either humans or purebred vampires. The protagonist wondered if Isuka and the other children had any idea of Stella's nature. If they had, they wouldn't have asked a stranger for help. Isuka asked if Stella would be okay. Gray replied that Stella wasn't sick, but simply exhausted. Isuka was surprised. The protagonist thought that when vampires lack food, they begin to thirst for blood, but Stella hadn't attacked any of the children. Gray wondered if Stella hadn't realized that her illness was due to her thirst for blood. The solution to this problem was simple. Stella just needed to eat. Gray asked Isuka what they usually ate. Isuka replied that the food the church had given them had long since run out. If they sold flowers, they could have some bread. Gray apologized and asked them to forget his question. He remembered that the church distributed food once a week, which meant the children had never eaten anything better. The protagonist said everything was fine and that he would provide them with food for a whole month. The children were very surprised. Fio said that was too much. Gray asked about the children wanting to help Stella. Everyone fell silent. The protagonist said that his magic was powerless here, and the only thing that could help Stella was good nutrition. All the children thanked the protagonist in unison. Gray said he would go get some groceries. He walked along the road, thinking that if he abandoned these children to their fate, he would greatly regret it. But at that moment, the evil half of him awakened, and the protagonist thought that the children were unlucky if they decided to rely on him. They would become victims of his desires. Gray thought something heavy would be bad for the children's stomachs and decided to start with bread and fruit. Gray noticed something and turned around. People were following him. A bald guy approached the protagonist and put his hand on his shoulder. He asked about the protagonist also having his eye on those children in the hut. Gray was surprised and asked what was going on. He grabbed the guy's hand and rudely told him not to dare touch him with his filthy hands. Gray twisted his opponent's hand, and while he was trying to figure out what had happened, he shoved the bald guy's face into the ground. The rest of the group were outraged by what's happening and called him an idiot. Gray said that he didn't know what the guys were planning to do with the children, but he would make them forget about that idea forever. The protagonist scattered the bad guys like kittens. They lay on the ground and groaned in pain. All the guys had a spider with a web drawn on their clothes. Gray grabbed one of the guys by the hair and said that if they had even one bad thought about the children, he would feed them to the harpies. The protagonist smiled terribly and said that the harpies would slowly devour their prey, starting from the feet, so that the prey couldn't escape and suffered. Fear was on the boy's face. Gray thought his face at that moment was scarier than his threats. Gray asked the boy why they had approached him. The boy replied that they thought he was just like them. The protagonist became angry, slammed the boy's face into the ground, and in a rough voice reminded him that you can't judge a book by its cover. Gray turned and continued walking. He wondered if there really wasn't an elementary school in this world. The city where the protagonist lives is called Bastok. It is located on the road that connects 2 countries. It is a large and very popular city. The city has a huge adventurers guild with a wide variety of quests and decent rewards. Therefore, it is easy to build an adventurer's career here. The large population does present some minor problems. A large number of bandits had gathered in the city, even forming an underground guild. Gray bought the children apples, milk, and bread. Since the protagonist wasn't part of a team, he kept all the rewards for himself. This allowed him to provide the children with food. It wasn't that no one wanted to team up with him. He just has a complex personality. Gray bought some dishes and with all his purchases, headed back to the children's hut. He told the children it was time to cook. The children were surprised that Gray-san would cook for them. The protagonist said he knew he didn't look like someone who did good. Isuka replied that wasn't what he meant. Aria asked permission to help. She said she'd start a fire. Lutz stood near the table with the groceries, watching them with wide eyes. Gray patted him on the head and asked him to wait a bit. Lutz's eyes were wide and sad, but his expression was very kind. Fio approached him with Nina, took his hand, and said that they would all wait together. The protagonist thought the children were very obedient and not at all like ordinary orphans. He made them some stew, while Aria and Isuka peeled fruit. Gray thought about how children could do things on their own. He felt someone tugging at his pants and looked down. Little Nina was standing there, looking at him with huge childish eyes. Gray asked her to remain still and wiped her snot. He said everything would be ready soon. Nina held tightly onto the protagonist's leg. Gray thought she was staring at him too intently. but he was glad the little girl wasn't afraid of him. Suddenly, Nina asked, "Daddy?" Gray was confused. He wondered if the little girl would be upset if he said no. Ariamel took the little girl by the shoulders and asked her not to disturb Gray-san. She carried Nina to the bed, but the little girl kept reaching her small hand toward the protagonist. Gray wondered what he should do. Ariamel told the children that the food was ready and they could begin. All the children sat at the table and pulled their plates toward themselves. Gray sat nearby drinking tea. He thought about sitting at the table with the children. Isuka said the food was delicious. Fio reminded him not to talk with his mouth full. She asked again what he meant. Isuka mumbled something incomprehensible again. Lutz and Nina all got dirty with the stew while eating. Gray carefully wiped the children's mouths. Nina thanked the protagonist and called him daddy again. Gray was embarrassed and Isuka asked if they enjoyed it. The children answered yes. Ariamel tried to spoon-feed the weakened Stella. When Stella ate one spoonful, Ariamel smiled. She asked Stella to take her time. All the children looked around and smiled. Gray thought that Stella had the energy to eat. Ariamel asked Gray-san to leave the cleaning up to them, to take it easy and rest. Gray agreed. Isuka thanked her for the food. Fio said it was delicious and thanked her too. Gray replied, "You're welcome," but he thought there was no need to be so formal. The protagonist decided it was time to make things right. He said he would go home. The children responded, "Okay." Nina climbed into the protagonist's lap, called him daddy, and gave him her doll. Her doll was so small that it fit in Gray's palm. The doll was dirty and torn in places. Gray looked at the doll carefully. Ariamel apologized to Gray-san. She tried to explain to Nina that Gray-san needed to go home. Little Nina hugged the protagonist tightly and said, "Daddy lives here." No. The protagonist said it was getting close to bedtime, and until then, he'd sit here. He felt sorry for the little girl. He stroked her hair and thought that he simply wanted to do everything possible to avoid regrets in the future. Suddenly, he remembered how his sister had said goodbye to him. He remembered how his mother had asked him not to open the door for anyone while they were gone. He remembered his father's words that his son was already big because he went to middle school. He remembered their last words, that they would see each other again. The next morning, Gray bought groceries for the children again. He decided that for now, it would be best for the children to stick to a diet. When the time came, he would treat them to delicious meat. The children thanked the protagonist for the groceries. Gray handed Ariamel some papers and asked her to look at them. She asked what they were. Gray replied that they contained various recipes with pictures. He explained that he couldn't come every day, so he offered to use the recipes. Ariamel said that the remaining 3 children were still sleeping and asked if the protagonist would like to see them. The protagonist thought he was like a father leaving on a business trip. The children were fast asleep on the bed. Gray asked if the children had slept well last night. Ariamel replied that Nina had thrown a slight tantrum, but it was no problem at all and there was no need to worry. When the protagonist said goodbye to the children, they asked him if they would see each other again. Gray answered, "Of course." He said that he had small plans and needed to make money. A little while later, a monster, an elder orc, runs through the forest. He screams that he can't win. He must run from this man. Ordinary people are just cattle for the orcs. They can do with them whatever they want. But one man defeated all his subordinates. He killed them all in the blink of an eye. The orc stopped to catch his breath. He thought that recently, this man had been terrifying the monsters. But just then, the protagonist burst out of the forest, looking ugly, his eyes wild and his teeth bared. He tried to strike the orc, but the orc reacted and jumped back. The orc couldn't understand why this man kept trying to stab him in the crotch. The protagonist said he was tired of playing tag. There was something the protagonist wanted to buy, so he ordered the orc to give him his head and his pride. Some time ago, the Bastok Adventurers Guild notice board. Gray found a quest to eliminate an elder orc. This quest suited the protagonist. He constantly heard people in town whispering when they saw him. Was he the man from the rumors that he was engaged in extortion, theft, murder, and child trafficking? People said all sorts of things about him, but if that were true, his adventurer's license would have been revoked long ago. Bandits were numerous. People were asking each other, "Isn't it Gray?" Someone asked the hero about the extermination quest. Was Gray really going to buy the materials and turn them in as his own? Gray recognized the man who was asking so many questions. It was Gansus. Gray asked Gansus not to bother him this morning because it was annoying. Gansus replied that it was rude. He said he heard about the protagonist threatening some children from the slums. He asked what the protagonist was up to. Gansus was the leader of the Blood Axe team. Gansus said it was hard for him to accept the fact that a barbarian like Gray was on the same rank as him. Gray thought about how Gansus was picking on him every time just because he had rejected the offer to join his team. Gansus was like an annoying fly. Gray shouted that Gansus had plenty of courage, especially after reaching B rank. Even though he had done it 3 years later than him, Gansus's face twisted with indignation. Gray said he knew the feeling. He, too, had been happy when he reached rank E+, just like Gansus was now. Gansus became angry. Gray said it was good to remember one's roots. The quest to exterminate goblins was posted on the board, and he offered to take it. Gansus became furious and lunged at the protagonist. One of the adventurers tried to restrain Gansus, reminding him that fighting was forbidden in the guild. One of the adventurers didn't understand what was happening. Someone shouted for Gansus to beat Gray, and someone was ready to bet on the protagonist. Gray thought that if Gansus had pulled out a weapon, he would have had a reason to defend himself. Gray told Sasha he would take the quest. Sasha asked him to take the quest first and only then fight. Sasha is the guild registrar. Gray tried to justify himself by saying that Gansus started it and it wasn't his fault. Sasha said they weren't children. Sasha looked at the quest and read that an elder orc had been spotted in the nearby forest. For the safety of the village, they were asking that the orc be killed. Sasha said the request was from a village near Bastok. The villagers were willing to pay, but no more than for a regular orc, despite the difficulty of the task. Sasha said she'd explained everything to the village representative, but the villagers were too poor to pay more. Gray should understand that himself. It was a completely routine advertisement. Sasha asked if Gray would join a team temporarily. Gray sternly refused. He said that even if he wanted to, no one would take him. The protagonist thought the journey to the village by cart would take a day. He needed to finish quickly and bring food to the children. Sasha thanked Gray-san. She said that none of the guild staff believed the dire rumors and that they would pray for his return. Gray hadn't expected to hear that. He said goodbye and left. Not that he was a philanthropist, but he had a benefit beyond the reward. Orcish family values are an ingredient in a powerful aphrodisiac. Gray could sell orc pride to nobles for a substantial sum of money. Gray left, determined to catch the orc. The orc's dignity will fulfill its duty. Thanks to this, more children will be born. Sasha watched Gray leave, curious about his thoughts. The client's village. The village chief thanked Gray-san for accepting the request. He asked Marina to greet the protagonist. A girl named Marina did. Gray said he wanted to begin the task immediately and asked for directions. The village chief said sunset was approaching and asked them to wait out the night. He said a room had been prepared for the adventurer. Gray replied that he would agree if the villagers insisted. Marina, a simple village girl, dreaded the thought of the upcoming night with this man. She remembered the village chief saying she was the most beautiful girl in the village, and would she please spend the night with the adventurer? And if she had a child with the hero, the entire village would help her raise the child. Marina thought she couldn't refuse because the villagers had raised her after she lost her parents. Marina knocked on Gray's door and asked permission to enter. Gray didn't understand what was happening. Marina stood modestly before the adventurer. Gray greeted her. Marina said that she would take care of the hero that night. There were tears in her eyes, and she was shaking with fear. The protagonist didn't understand why she was crying, but then he realized that this was how the villagers had decided to compensate for the low reward for the quest. Indeed, there were plenty of lustful animals among the adventurers, but not everyone thought only about what a man had between his legs, like Gansus. Gray said he didn't need anything. Marina was surprised. Gray said more sternly that there was no need. It was early for him to leave, so he wanted to go to bed. He asked Marina to tell the villagers about this and go to sleep peacefully. Marina tried to object. Gray said not to worry, he would still complete the quest. After that, the villagers would be able to hunt in the forest again and return to their normal lives. Marina replied that she understood everything. She apologized for the intrusion and wished him sweet dreams. She left the protagonist's house and thought about how good and kind he was. She encountered the village chief, who asked what was wrong with Gray-san. Marina replied that he didn't need her, but not to worry, he would complete the task. The village chief was delighted and said that this was happiness. The villagers hugged Marina. The next day, Marina was preparing breakfast for the protagonist. She hoped he would like it. She modestly knocked on the door and announced that she had brought breakfast. Gray replied that he would open the door right now. Marina wished him good morning and apologized for the previous night. Gray replied that there was no need to apologize and thanked her for the breakfast. Gray said that it was very tasty. Marina blushed. In the morning, the entire village gathered to see the protagonist off on his mission. They said he was the only one they could count on and asked him to be careful. Marina shouted at him to take care of himself. Gray waved at everyone. Present tense. The orc asked again, should I give him his pride and head? The orc decided that whatever this man wanted, he had to run away. The orc turned and tried to run, but was hit in the arm. His arm flew off. The protagonist said that the orc needs to pray before dying, and he needs his pride and a head. He asked the orc what to do first. The protagonist didn't wait for an answer and struck the orc's head. He butchered the carcass in the forest. In this world, there is such a thing as a magic bag. The bag is very convenient, but it also costs a lot of money. Not many adventurers can afford it. Gray bought himself such a bag when he was in the party. Thanks to this bag, he won't have to lug around an orc's head in pride, but he still feels uneasy carrying such things in his bag. Village. The protagonist informed the village chief that he had killed an orc and that the forest was now safe. The chief thanked Gray-san for the good news and for returning safe and sound. Gray pulled an orc's head from his bag as proof of his work. The villagers were frightened and asked him to remove the head. Marina called out to Gray-san. She asked if he would like to stay another night in their village. Marina offered to cook the hero a meal. He thanked her for the offer, but he was in a hurry. Marina became sad. As the protagonist left, the villagers thanked him for everything. Gray returned to town on a cart. He thought about his growing assets and how he would soon be able to realize his plan, a plan to build his dream home. Gray had been living in the city of Bastok at an inn for a long time. It was nice there, but it was time to settle down. Gray was delighted with his loot, as it would help bring many children and good people into the world. The next morning, Bastock Inn, Gray decided to fix Nina's doll himself. He cleaned it and sewed it up. He was sure Nina wanted it fixed, but it was too worn. Even with some repairs, it could tear again. In this case, alchemy could help. The innkeeper was a large, bald man. He asked the protagonist if Gray had just returned and was already getting ready to go somewhere. Gray wanted to explain something, but the innkeeper interrupted him. He said that at his age, too, he would run straight to a woman after work. Gray called the innkeeper's daughter, Lena, and said that her father had started acting up again. The innkeeper was terrified. A girl's voice was heard from above, asking if it was her father again. A pretty girl came running, holding a broom in her hands, and loudly shouted at her father to stop pestering the guests with his stories. The innkeeper said he had simply said too much. The innkeeper called the protagonist's names and said that calling Lena was against the rules. He said that men should share each other's exploits. Lena attacked her father with a broom. Gray turned and left. He said he didn't understand what the innkeeper was talking about. Lena continued sweeping the floor and wished Gray-san a good day. Gray thought about the inn. The rooms were clean, the food was delicious, and the staff was very polite. If it weren't for the owner, the inn would be very popular. The alchemist's workshop. Gray asked if Lux was in the workshop. The alchemist asked if it was him and what kind of doll he had. He wasn't very good at playing with toys. Gray said he wanted to fix the toy and asked if Lux could do it. The alchemist said of course, but he asked for money in advance for the repairs. Gray asked how much money was needed. Lux said he didn't need money. In fact, there was an ingredient he really wanted, an elder orc. Gray pulled out the orc's head, but Lux screamed in horror. He asked the protagonist to put the head away. Why Gray was carrying it around? Gray knew what he needed. Let him give him the orc's pride and head. Gray left the workshop and wondered how the alchemist knew about the jewels. After all, he had taken one. He would forgive the alchemist. He was the kind of person who would give an expensive healing potion just for being nice. Besides, if all this made the child happy, he wouldn't mind. The outskirts of the slums. Gray came to visit the children. Nina stretched out her arms to him and screamed, "Daddy!" Aria apologized to Gray and said that little Nina had been crying all day while the protagonist was gone. Gray knelt down, stroked Nina's head, and said that everything was fine. Stella approached the protagonist and extended her hand. She told Daddy to pet Nina well. Ariamel tried to pull her back, but Gray replied that he understood and was very happy that Stella had recovered. He thought again about Nina calling him Daddy. Gray remembered he'd forgotten to give Nina something and handed her the updated doll. Nina was overjoyed and hugged her doll. Nina said that Atia-chan was now very beautiful. The children were surprised by such an act. Ariamel didn't know how to thank the protagonist for everything he had done for them. Gray replied that it was nothing. He asked Ariamel if he should make them something to eat. She agreed. Ariamel asked Nina to play with Theo while she and Gray prepared dinner for everyone. The protagonist said that Nina looked pleased with the doll. Ariamel agreed. Nina hugged the protagonist's leg and looked at him. When the children sat down to dinner, the protagonist became thoughtful. Isuka held out his mushrooms to Fio and said she could eat them. Fio replied that she hadn't asked. Gray thought that from what he had seen, Isuka seemed like an ordinary boy. Would he be the hero who would save this world? This greatly worried the protagonist. But if it were possible, he wanted these children to live peacefully for as long as possible. Gray gathered his strength and told the children he wanted to talk to them. All the children turned their heads and began to listen attentively to the protagonist. Gray said he planned to buy a house in the city. He asked if they would like to live with him. The children were surprised. There was an eerie silence in the house. Gray said that he would understand if they refused. Isuka apologized and said they were just very surprised. Fio clarified that Gray-san was ready to take not only Nina and Ariamel, but also Isuka and the others. Gray answered, of course. Ariamel asked again, all of them? Gray answered, yes. Nina grabbed the protagonist's finger and said in a childish voice that Nina wanted to be with her dad forever. Lutz smiled sweetly. Ariamel was speechless with joy. She shouted that she would try her best. Gray asked, in what way? He hadn't planned this from the start, but he couldn't part with these children. Gray said he was glad it didn't upset the children. Ariamel asked again, was it upset? She almost cried when she said they were grateful for everything Gray had done for them. She asked the other children if they agreed with these words, and all the children simultaneously shook their heads. Only Stella sat silently. Ariamel asked her if she agreed. Stella raised her finger and said loudly, okay. The protagonist was lost in thought, unable to read Stella's thoughts. After dinner, the protagonist wanted to go to town. Nina came out to see him off and asked if Daddy was leaving. Gray replied that he was going to town to look for a new house. He asked Nina to wait for him there. Nina replied, okay, and hugged the doll. Fio called out to Gray-san that they would see each other soon, and Isuka asked the protagonist to take care of himself. Gray told the children that they would see each other soon. He walked through the city streets, thinking that he wanted all the children to have their own rooms and a large hall. That meant he needed a much larger house than he had planned. It would be nice to buy a house for the adventurer team, the Adventurers Guild. Gansus approached Gray and asked if he had managed to buy the Elder Orc's ears. Gray sighed and said, is it him again? Gansus asked if he had already completed the task. It had only been 2 days, which was highly suspicious. He asked Gray to tell him where such a good shop was. Gray began to get irritated. He replied that he understood that Gansus wanted to piss him off, but shouldn't he be going on the quest himself? If if he was afraid of goblins, he could take the herb gathering quest. Gansus told Gray to stop and answer the question. Where did he buy the orc ears? The protagonist thought, is this man seriously asking such a thing? The guild has a reward system for killing monsters, even if there's no quest for them. All you need to do is bring a part of the monster as proof. In the case of an orc, that means the ears. The main reason Gansus is so eager to know where the protagonist got the trophy is because he wants to profit from it. If killing the monster is part of the quest, then any amount of proof is acceptable. Gray replied that he hadn't brought ears, although ears were present. The protagonist pulled the head of an elder orc from his bag and threw it at Gansus. Gansus was speechless. He tossed the orc's head aside. Gray told him not to do that. He knew Gansus would start picking on him, so he brought the whole head. He held it very close to his face so that he could look at it carefully, since he had never killed an elder orc before. He begged Gray to stop. Sasha sternly asked him to report the mission complete. Gray looked back and said, okay. He placed the orc's head on the reception desk. Sasha politely asked the protagonist not to place the head on the desk so suddenly. It could look like harassment. Gray said it was simply proof of mission completion. Sasha asked not to do that to the receptionists. New receptionists might faint. Gray told Sasha not to worry because all his tasks go through her hands. Sasha is one of the few guild employees who isn't afraid of the protagonist's face. That's why Gray always chooses her, even if there's a huge line. Gray said he only gives such things to Sasha. She didn't understand how she should respond to such things. Sasha placed the quest reward on the tray. The protagonist sighed. He said there was something he wanted to ask. Sasha asked him to get straight to the point. After Gray explained the problem, Sasha replied that this was also part of her responsibilities. She adjusted her glasses and suggested they go outside. Sasha asked Melinda to take over at the counter. Melinda yawned widely and replied, okay. When she noticed an orc's head on the counter, she screamed. What should she do with it? Gray asked Sasha, is everything all right? Sasha calmly replied that if you don't nudge the young people, they'll get completely lazy. Sasha walked confidently outside. She said they weren't talking about young people now. She never imagined Gray would turn to her for help choosing a place to live. Sasha asked if something was wrong, but without waiting for an answer, she informed the protagonist that they had already arrived. She said she was sure this house would suit Gray's needs perfectly. Gray looked at the house in surprise. He recognized it. Sasha confirmed his suspicions. It was Team Valkyrie's former home. Sasha said they moved when the team grew, so the house was now empty. The Valkyries are an all-female A+ team. They are the closest team in Bastok to achieving S rank. Fighters of this rank are for teams of noble and royal families. The members of Team Valkyrie are very handsome, and all the young male nobles drool over them. Gray had been to this house once on business related to the Valkyries. He had some doubts, but the size of the house, the number of rooms, and the location all seemed right. Gray remembered the children's faces when he told them about the house. Sasha was surprised that the protagonist had made a decision so quickly. Gray said the only thing that bothered him was the price. Sasha replied that he shouldn't worry about the price, as the Valkyrie ladies had asked her to tell him they would cover half the cost. He was surprised by this and escorted her back to the guild, and she thanked him for it. Melinda's voice came from the guild hall, asking him to do something about the orc's head. Gray thought buying the house was a good deal. He wanted to go to the children in the slums, but he noticed 2 people in an alley, 2 on the roof, and 1 person behind him. He knew these people were coming for him. He said they could hide their murderous intent a little. A hooded man with a spiderweb mask asked the protagonist if he was Gray. Gray remembered the same spiderweb symbol on the bandits. He may not even think about a long life. The greedy spiders will kill him. The boy then repeated the gang's name twice, Greedy Spider. But the boy had begged for mercy when Gray broke his arms. The hooded man said they had come to kill the protagonist. Gray asked if they were Greedy Spider. He thought he should act like a simpleton. The man said the protagonist would soon die, and there was no point in answering. But at that moment, Gray abruptly turned and brought his sword to the man's neck. He loudly declared that he needed an answer. The protagonist explained that if these people weren't Greedy Spider, he would simply kill them. But if they were Greedy Spider, they wouldn't have an easy death. Gray pressed him for an answer, but the man remained silent. Gray said he had no time because he had to make dinner for the children, and chopped off the head in one motion. He immobilized the other people in the ambush with chains, using magic. He hid them in a safe place and went about his business. A shack in the slums. 2 bandits were sitting in the bushes near the house and wanted to attack the children while the protagonist was away. One guy told the other that the man was very strong and they should wait for the others to kill him. But suddenly, Gray snuck up from behind and whispered in the guy's ear that he had decided to ignore the warning. Fear appeared on the guy's face. They jumped up and screamed. Gray said they didn't have the guts. He chained the guys and said he couldn't get the information he needed from those guys, but he hoped these guys wouldn't want to suffer. He asked where the rest of his gang buddies were. Gray forbade the bandits to think about the children. Aria noticed Grayson approaching the house and greeted him. Nina cried out, "Welcome back, Daddy." Gray replied that he was home. He thought he'd finish off the bandits after the children went to bed. He'd found all the greedy spider members. Nina reached out to the protagonist and said, "Daddy." She asked to be picked up. Gray coughed nervously and picked up Nina. At that moment, Isuka came out of the house and asked if Ariamel needed help. Stella came out with him and said that it wasn't fair. She wanted to be picked up too. Gray picked her up too. Lutz ran out of the house and started tugging at the protagonist's clothes. Gray asked him to wait his turn, and Lutz agreed. Gray announced that he had bought a house and that everything would be ready for them to move in 2 days. The children smiled and said, okay. That night, when the children were asleep, the protagonist got up and got dressed. He wanted to go out, but Stella woke up and asked if Daddy had gone to work. Gray apologized for waking her and said he wouldn't be long. He asked Stella to go back to bed. Stella asked if Daddy would be back. Gray replied, of course, because they would be living together. Stella asked the protagonist not to get hurt. Gray promised that this wouldn't happen, so she wouldn't worry. Stella said that everyone would worry about him. Gray stroked her head and said he'd be back soon. Stella asked if he'd tell her why he'd decided to become their father. Gray replied that he had nothing to hide and was ready to answer right away. Stella said she wanted everyone to hear it. Gray left the house, and he had a feeling that this girl could see right through him. He knew that he'd have to work hard to find a new life with his children. Gray approached the bound men and said that he really hoped they'd take him to the lair. The bound men showed him the house where the headquarters was. One of the boys begged them to let him go. He admitted that he deeply regretted it and promised to change in order to live according to his conscience. He begged for mercy. Another boy also began to beg them to let him go because they'd taken the protagonist to the lair. He said he didn't want to die. The protagonist said that he'd already warned them, but they themselves had decided not to listen. There's no counting the number of people whose lives these bandits have ruined. People like them will never change, and leaving the bandits alive would expose the children to new dangers, so the protagonist killed them to calm the children. Gray went to the gang's lair. The guy at the entrance asked who the protagonist was, even though he didn't seem like a kind person. Gray laughed and replied that he was an adventurer. He asked if the greedy spider was here. The guys at the entrance exchanged glances. The leader asked, how did he find them? At that moment, Gray said they were all screwed. He blew off the bandits' heads with one blow. A blow to the head is the fastest and most effective. Gray went inside. He thought he should refrain from using magic because it was problematic. One of the bandits might have the skill to detect magic. The bandits asked the protagonist who he was and what happened to the guys outside. Gray replied that he simply killed them. The protagonist didn't wait for a reaction to his words and simply began killing the bandits one by one. They begged for mercy, but it was too late. Gray thought this was a typical bandit lair, meaning the journey to the boss would take some time. One of the bandits shouted that they were under attack. A guy with one eye came out and said he was a former B-rank adventurer. He wanted to make the protagonist fear him, but before the guy could finish his sentence, Gray killed him. The protagonist was upset that this guy wasn't as good as Gansus. At that moment, a man in a cloak jumped up to him and tried to hit him, but he managed to react and dodged the blow. Gray thought, what's wrong with this gang? This guy is a killer, and he's strong. Gray pulled the cloak off and saw an old acquaintance. The guy tried to run away, but Gray caught him, kicked him, and grabbed him by the mohawk. He hinted that the guy should tell where his boss was. The guy was in pain, but he agreed. He led the protagonist inside a cave full of traps. Gray thought he should have fed one of the bandits to the harpies. When they arrived, Gray saw a guy in a black suit sitting on a throne, surrounded by a huge web. The guy was surprised that the protagonist had come this far alone. The boss asked what kind of relationship he had with these kids. Gray proudly replied that he was a father to the children. The guy asked again, a father? He was crazy to say that. Gray replied that he had little time and wanted to get this over with. He reminded the guy not to forget to apologize for all the sins he had committed in his next life. The guy asked him to stop. He asked if the protagonist knew who those children were. The next day, Nina told Gray she wanted to eat. Stella said it was already morning. Together, they tried to wake the protagonist. Aria yelled for the little ones to let Gray-san sleep because he was tired. Gray thought about getting up. At the inn, the innkeeper asked, greedy spiders? He said they were a large group in the city. This group had many good fighters. They often fought with the guards and really annoyed the elite guards. Well, overnight, this group disappeared. He said that all the members of the group were killed right in the lair, along with their boss. All the bandits had their heads cut off. Lena said she heard about this on her way to the store. Gray thought about it. The innkeeper said that you would think that other groups would use this opportunity to expand, but that won't happen, because everyone will be afraid of being the next target. The bandits will be very quiet. Gray recalled the conversation, how the innkeeper took care of him all this time. The innkeeper was surprised. He thought he just liked to chat. Lena was surprised that Gray-san decided to leave the inn after living there for so long. Gray agreed. He said he remembered how Lena was scared by his face the first time they met. Lena smiled, apologized, and said she didn't remember that. The innkeeper said she was too little then. He told the protagonist to come visit if he needed help. Gray agreed. The next day, Aria asked Nina if she had brought her doll. Nina said yes. Gray told the children that he planned to buy new clothes, but first they needed to wash up. Theo didn't believe they could wash. Public bath. The woman at the reception said, welcome. Gray said he would like to take private rooms, one for boys and one for girls. Theo held towels in her hands and said they would see each other soon. Nina approached Gray and asked about him coming with them. Aria picked her up and told her that Gray-san was a man and that they wouldn't be gone for long. Stella called Nina to come with them. Gray said that if Nina listened, she would get tired of hugging him later. In the washroom, Gray called Lutz to wash his hair. Lutz obediently sat down on a chair and prepared to wash. The protagonist soaped Lutz's hair, but his face became ominous again. He thought that he had long wanted to try something only a father and child could do. Gray told Isuka that he was next to wash. Isuka sat in a basin of warm water and said that he was fine as is. He was embarrassed by the stranger, but Gray sat him down on a chair and soaped his hair. Later in the waiting room, Aria apologized for the delay. She saw that Lutz had fallen asleep in Gray's arms. The protagonist replied that everything was fine. Clothing store. The girl at the entrance greeted them politely. She asked what clothes Gray was interested in. Gray replied, anything that might suit children. Isuka asked if Gray-san could help them choose clothes. Gray replied that he had no sense of style. Nina ran out in a beautiful fluffy dress and shouted that she was like a princess. Stella helped Lutz change her shirt. Aria, Isuka and Fio laughed and tried on new clothes. Nina said, dying. A little later, the children entered the house the protagonist was going to buy. They were very surprised by its size. Stella turned to Gray and said that they would go see the house. She called all the children to come with her. Isuka shouted for the children to be careful because there were stairs. Fio shouted for them to wait and follow them. Fio took Nina and Stella by the hands, and Isuka helped Lutz. Gray told Ariamel that their private rooms were on the second floor. Whoever got there first would get the room. Ariamel replied that she would wait until the little ones chose their rooms. She invited Gray-san to go first. Gray said there was no need to hold back her emotions, because they were a family now. Ariamel was at a loss for words. Gray thought she needed time to adjust. He could hear children's voices from above the house. Stella said the rooms were big, and Fio agreed with her. Gray said that for now, the little ones could sleep with him or Ariamel. Ariamel agreed. The protagonist thought that everything would be fine until the little ones wanted their own rooms. He prepared housing, clothing, and food for the children. Next, he needed to find a school. There were academies in this world that accepted children as young as 12, but he wondered if the children should go there. It was an ideal place for the children of nobles to build relationships, but that was about it. If the noble children did something to his children, he wouldn't be able to restrain himself. He wondered if the children had any dreams. He hoped that, with time, they would tell him everything themselves. The protagonist cut off the boss's head before he could reveal anything. But that doesn't mean he isn't interested in children's pasts. He would learn everything about them while living together. Every family has secrets from each other. Gray didn't want to pry information from the children. He didn't care who these children really were. He would still support them. Gray asked the older children why the three of them had come. What was wrong? Isuka replied that they always slept together, so it was difficult for them to fall asleep alone. Gray told the children to come in. He said there wasn't enough room on the bed, so he would lay out futons on the floor. He wished everyone good night. When all the children fell asleep around him on the floor, he thought about how it wasn't much different from how they slept before. But it wasn't so bad. Isuka was sleeping on the bed when Fio ran into his room and tried to wake him up. She said everyone had started eating breakfast. Isuka apologized and said he would get up now. Almost a month had passed since everyone moved into the new house. All the children wished Isuka good morning. Isuka likes to sleep in the morning. Fio is very smart. Nina loves to eat. Stella has a sweet tooth. Nina and Stella are two little gluttons. Gray thanked Ariamel for the food. Ariamel told the protagonist to leave the dishes on the table. Gray noticed the recipes he gave the children on the table. Ariamel said it was a copy of that recipe. She didn't want to ruin the one he gave them, so she kept it as a souvenir. Gray thought that Ariamel could write and read, but this is unusual for children in this world. Gray told the children that he was leaving. The little ones unanimously said that Daddy should come back soon. They wished him a good day. Outside, Lutz sat down and carefully watched a cat under a bush. Fio told him to say goodbye to the cat. Lutz doesn't talk at all, but he loves looking at animals. He noticed the protagonist passing by and waved his hands to say goodbye. They still don't know much about each other, but they're gradually becoming closer. Near the city of Bastok, the protagonist's life has changed dramatically. Before, all he did was sleep or prepare for expeditions. Now he only takes on one-day quests, because he needs to quickly kill all the goblins and get home. Adventurers Guild. Sasha said that Gray-san hasn't been himself lately. He's completely ignoring Gansus. Gray was surprised. Sasha asked if he really thought she wouldn't notice. She handed him a payment for the order. Gray asked if Gansus had been hitting on him lately. He said he hadn't even noticed. Sasha asked if Gray was serious, since Gansus was standing right behind him. Gray asked if they were in a horror movie. He turned around and decided to go home to read books for Nina and the others. It's much better than wasting time on Gansus. The protagonist went into town, and on the way, he bought donuts for the children. Gray asked the saleswoman for 7 donuts. The town lived a peaceful life. Cats yawned, sitting on the lawn. Birds chirped, perched on the lampposts. The protagonist was returning home. A sudden flashback. A friend said goodnight and they went their separate ways. Upon returning home, he announced that he was home, but his family was no longer there. Only photographs of his loved ones remained. It was a senseless habit and he couldn't break it. Present tense. Gray approached the house and told Nina and Lutz that he had arrived. The babies rushed to greet him. Ariamel told Gray-san to come home. She said, "Welcome back." Gray carried the babies in his arms. Ariamel announced that dinner was ready. She asked if the protagonist would like to eat now or take a bath first. Gray noticed how quickly Ariamel moved. She made many different movements before he answered the question. Gray said that he was sure everyone was hungry, and it would be better if they ate now. Gray gave Ariamel the donuts. She told him the protagonist had been buying donuts for a week. Stella skipped dinner because she wanted sweets. Ariamel said it was unhealthy for the children and asked him not to bring donuts so often. Gray thought Ariamel was like a big sister to the children, but he was wrong. She acted like a mother. Gray suggested they all go eat. During dinner, Fio suggested Isuka tell him everything, and he agreed. Isuka called out to Gray-san. The protagonist asked what happened. Isuka explained that he and Fio wanted to become adventurers. They asked if Gray could teach them swordsmanship and magic. Ariamel almost choked on what she heard. She asked what they said. Fio told her sister Aria that they also wanted to be useful. Gray thought Isuka and Fio felt like freeloaders, but for him, their presence was happiness. Gray said that if that's what they wanted, he had no right to refuse, but he asked for a little delay. Aria's objections fell on deaf ears. An adventurer's work is full of dangers. Therefore, the protagonist should properly train the young people, so they can stand up for themselves, even if something happens to him. Although Gray hadn't planned to die, he didn't want to make the children go through the loss of a loved one a second time. Stella began muttering something in her sleep. She apologized to Daddy for taking something. Something happened because of the transformation. The next morning, everyone was sitting at the table and eating breakfast. Gray prayed and thanked for the food. Nina repeated, "Thank you for the food." Aria told everyone to pounce on breakfast. Gray caught Stella's piercing gaze. He thought Stella would put a hole in him. Aria told Gray-san that she had prepared a lunchbox for him. She said he was skipping lunch, but if he didn't need a lunchbox, he could leave it at home. Gray replied that he sometimes thought about lunch, so he would gladly accept it. He wanted to see someone who would refuse such attention. Aria said she wanted to talk about Isuka and Fio. Gray replied that it didn't matter to him whether they became adventurers or not, but he wanted to help them achieve their goals. He understood Ariamel's concerns and offered to discuss everything with them. Aria agreed. She wished Gray-san a good day and that he would return quickly. Adventurers Guild. Gray thought the guild was too noisy. He asked Sasha about something that had happened today. Sasha replied that Team Valkyrie was returning from an expedition today. They had cleared an unexplored dungeon. News of this had been floating around for several days. Gray sighed. Sasha said that in any case, it would be better for him to contact another registrar today. Gray agreed. Sasha turned and asked not to bring any more heads. Melinda tearfully begged the same. Gray wondered if the Valkyries had cleared the dungeon. Gray hadn't been in a dungeon in several years. The dungeons he was interested in were teeming with problematic monsters, so going there alone was dangerous. Individuals with special abilities could be born among the monsters in this world. Gray decided to hunt goblins again today. Usually, there's no way to know what a monster's ability is unless you fight it. For example, there might be a goblin completely immune to magic. Any magic would be useless against it. But despite this, it's still just a goblin and can be killed simply by striking or slashing. Even if a monster is skilled as an archer, any novice can kill it if it uses a club. No matter how powerful an ability is, if you don't know what it does, it's completely useless. On the other hand, if the monster is smart enough, that could be a problem. Among the goblins the protagonist killed yesterday, there was one like that. It moved unusually fast. It was something intangible, a skill or a gift, something some people were born with. If the church heard about this, they would raise a fuss. But Gray didn't think there was a difference between monsters and humans for a god. Among humans, there were heroes, saints, and masters of various skills. Something similar could exist among monsters too. He ate his lunch and thought it was delicious. Eating and sitting on the grass, that was a good idea. He thought maybe they should organize a picnic for the children sometime. Ariamel was a very good cook, a good housewife, and a very beautiful girl. The protagonist thought she would be very popular with men. One day, she would bring her boyfriend, and they would have to practice so as not to accidentally chop off his head. The Adventurers Guild. Melinda loudly invited the next adventurer. Fear crossed her face, and she began to hiccup. Gray thought she had a strange grimace on her face. He said he was handing over the task and handed over the bag. Melinda exhaled loudly and said it was good that he brought only the right parts of the monster. When she saw the protagonist's face, she thought it was an orc's head again, and that was the end of her. Gray tried to justify himself and said that he didn't always bring heads. He asked if the Valkyries were back yet. Melinda smiled and said that they were upstairs now, talking with Sasha and the GM. She tried to joke and said that there were many beauties in Valkyrie. Had Gray-san really decided to take an interest in any of them? Gray replied that was not the case. Gray turned around and told Melinda not to shorten her boss's name. Melinda asked if Gray would be waiting for the Valkyries. They should be here soon. The protagonist replied that everything was fine. He wanted to talk to them about the house, but apparently it was not meant to be. The Valkyries had just returned from an expedition, so they weren't leaving for another one anytime soon. Gray headed home, wanting to buy some more sweets, but remembered Aria's request. He didn't want to be scolded. Upon returning home, he gave Aria the lunchbox and told her it was delicious. She replied that she was very happy about it. She would make another lunch tomorrow. Late in the evening, everyone was playing cards in Gray's living room. There was a knock on the door. The protagonist decided to check who had arrived. Two cute girls stood at the threshold. Gray asked what they wanted. He recognized the girls. They were from Team Valkyrie. Standing at the door was an A+ rank adventurer, the leader of Team Valkyrie, named Amelia. The other girl was an A+ rank adventurer, a member of Team Valkyrie, named Kasha. Amelia told Gray they hadn't seen each other in a while. Melinda told them he was on the first floor of the guild while they were turning in their quest. It was rude of him not to wait for them. Gray silently thanked Melinda. Kasha greeted them with a smile and asked if they wouldn't be invited inside. Aria peeked out from behind Gray. She asked Gray-san if these were his acquaintances. She asked if she needed to make tea. Amelia's expression was indignant, and Kasha said, "Oh my god." Aria didn't understand what was going on. Gray also didn't understand why there was so much tension in the air. He invited the girls in. The girls sat down on the sofa in the living room. The little ones watched the guests with curiosity. Isuka asked Gray-san if these were his guests. Gray replied that they used to be on the same team. The children greeted each other politely. Aria quickly brought tea and offered it to the guests. The girls thanked her for the treat. Nina and Stella climbed onto the protagonist's lap and hugged him. Aria explained that the girls were simply afraid that Gray-san would be taken away from them. The girls repeated one after another that the girls would take him away. Aria called the little ones with her. She said that Gray-san had an important conversation with his friends. Amelia said that now she had even more questions for Gray. She asked who the children were. Gray replied that they were his children. Amelia was speechless. She asked menacingly who their mother was. Nina was frightened and clung even closer to Gray. She began to cry and said that Nina was his daddy. Gray thought that his t-shirt was now covered in baby snot. Kasha asked Amelia not to yell like that because she was scaring the children. Kasha calmly asked Amelia to think about everything. She asked Aria how old she was. Aria answered that she was 13. Amelia wondered what Gray meant by that, having children while he was on their team, and the girl Gray was dating was the children's mother. Amelia was ready to explode. Kasha noticed that one of the girls was a vampire. She asked if the girl was half or a quarter vampire. Stella also pressed herself tightly against the protagonist. Gray told her that everything was fine. These girls wouldn't hurt anyone. Stella replied, "Okay." Gray asked for a chance to tell her everything. He sighed and told her everything, from their first meeting to how they started living together. Amelia said Gray hadn't changed. Kasha added that Gray had always helped the weak and needy, and all this despite the fact that he had the face of a bandit. Gray thought Kasha had a way with words, which infuriated him. Gray admitted that he wanted to ask about home, but he wondered how the Valkyries knew he was going to buy it. Amelia replied that they were talking about any house in Bastok for the team Gray would assemble. The protagonist asked why the girls wanted to pay for it, even though it was very noble of them. Amelia thought about it and replied that if he needed a house for the team, then he had joined the team. That's why they came to check on the team members. Amelia added that Gray was strongly against joining another team, so she wondered who could convince him otherwise, but she didn't want him to be deceived. Gray was indignant. After all, he was not a green rookie. Amelia said that instead of a team, they saw 6 children. Gray greatly surprised them. Nina started rubbing her eyes. Aria said it was time for them to go to bed. Nina asked Daddy not to leave. Gray replied that he was not going anywhere, and when he finished talking, he would also go to bed. The children obediently went to rest. Gray said that Aria was a very reliable child. Amelia asked what Gray was calling her child, but her behavior was more like a mother's. Amelia sternly said that was enough for today. Kasha apologized for disturbing them. Gray offered to walk the girls home. Amelia sternly replied that there was no need to do that. Had the protagonist really forgotten who they were? She wondered which bandit would be strong enough to defeat them. Kasha smiled and said Gray was the same as always, and that made her very happy. Suddenly, she mentioned that a certain criminal group had been wiped out a month ago. All the bandits had been beheaded. Amelia added that because of this, public order had improved, so there was no need to worry about them. Gray replied, "Okay." Aria came out and asked if the guests were leaving already. Amelia apologized for disturbing them. Aria replied that everything was fine. She added that all of Gray-san's friends were welcome at any time. Amelia was surprised to be mistaken for a friend. Aria asked if she was mistaken. Kasha took Amelia by the shoulder and said they were leaving. She thanked her for letting them out. Gray replied that the girls should come visit again. An A+ rank adventurer received critical damage because he was called a friend. Gray asked why they came. Aria replied that the girls came to make sure he was okay. The next morning, Gray traditionally bids farewell to the children. Stella and Nina wished Daddy good luck and a speedy return. Aria brought him lunch in the box, and he was grateful, while she asked him to take care of himself. He noticed Isuka and Fio training, but only with wooden swords for now. He asked the children not to overdo it with the training. Isuka asked to start teaching them magic next time. Fio wished them a good day. Gray asked to learn reading first, and then swordsmanship and magic. He knew Aria could teach them reading. It would be a good pretext for conversation. Having a family who always sees him off is a great luxury, but for Gray, it is more valuable than expensive food or beautiful jewelry. He felt capable of anything to protect such a life. This was the power of a father's love. Adventurers Guild. Amelia wished good morning and apologized again for yesterday's intrusion. Gray replied that everything was fine. He thanked her for worrying about him. All the girls from Team Valkyrie waved to Gray in greeting. An A+ adventurer from Team Valkyrie, named Aria. She said they hadn't seen each other for a long time and gave the victory sign. Aria told her leader that time was running out. Amelia answered, exactly. Gray asked about how they had just returned and were working again. Amelia replied that they were going to meet Lord Bastock. He wanted to know something about the garden. She asked Gray about something he was also interested in. Gray answered, of course. He thought every adventurer wanted to visit the dungeon. She remembered that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Aria grabbed Amelia and dragged her. She said they needed to hurry, otherwise Kasha would start arguing. Amelia managed to say that they would see each other again. Melinda asked the protagonist if he was on good terms with Valkyrie. Gray asked why the sudden question. Melinda replied that Amelia-san had asked about him yesterday, and now they were all chatting pleasantly. Gray replied that they had known each other for a long time. He asked if Melinda had finished her questions and that he would be leaving. He knew that if he told them they used to be on the same team, he'd get a lot of questions. They'd split up for the usual reasons, but he didn't want to bring it up without a reason. Sasha wouldn't ask anything. His former team was called the Lone Blade. Amelia was a swordsman. Kasha was a healer. Gray was a magic knight. The leader and 2 other comrades. There were 6 of them, and they were a team. The team's rank was rapidly rising, but so were their responsibilities. At the time, they were in another country and were a promising mid-level team. That's why the Lord wanted to meet Valkyrie, to establish connections with future S-rank adventurers. If you think about it, it's beneficial for both parties, but Gray doesn't know what Amelia and the other girls think about it. Isuka and Fio would be happy to explore dungeons. Gray would be interested in learning about the garden. The protagonist decided to invite Valkyrie to dinner and ask her everything. Gray wondered if the reason his children wanted to become adventurers was because of him. He, as a true father, would have cried. Gray ate lunch. It was delicious. He noticed he was getting tired quickly and had a belly. He only took on easy quests and ate delicious food morning, noon, and evening. It all came from living a good life. He wondered what he'd have for dinner. The Adventurers Guild. Amelia asked Gray if he'd already returned. She reasoned that if he'd returned so early he must have taken on an easy quest. Gray replied that he wanted to return home before it got dark. Amelia asked if it was because of the children. Gray replied, for himself too. He said that Amelia was also very early. Hadn't the Lord invited them to dinner? Amelia said that the Lord had invited her, but she had refused. Gray wondered if the Lord was a count. She had refused a nobleman? Amelia said that they hardly talked about the garden. The Lord announced that he wanted to make the Valkyries members of the hero's team. It seemed that the Oracle had chosen the hero in another country. Gray wondered if the hero had already been chosen. Amelia said that they were recommended only because the entire team consisted only of women. They were all high-ranking, and it was a perfect match. Gray asked if Amelia was thrilled with such a proposal. Amelia answered, of course not. It was like they were being married off. This is not a funny joke. Kasha said that Emmy was too loud. She asked her to calm down. Kasha apologized to Gray and asked him to forget everything Amelia had said. Kasha called Amelia to go. Amelia said goodbye to the protagonist and said they would see each other again. Gray thought that a high-ranking team had received a request from the country. He hoped nothing bad would happen. Gray thought, isn't Isuka a hero? The protagonist doesn't have to be just a hero. In times like these, knowledge of the game wouldn't hurt. Gray thought again about what he was having for dinner. At home, Gray announced that he was back. Nina rushed to greet him. The children all said welcome back. On one hand, Gray was glad there wasn't a future hero. Aria announced that 3 little children wanted to show Gray something. The little children were holding pieces of paper in their hands. Stella said for everyone, Daddy, here. They unanimously turned over the sheets of paper, and inside were drawings. Each of them had drawn Gray. He didn't want to erase the writing of these 3 angels from his memory. He sat down and held his head. Aria asked if everything was okay. Gray replied that of course everything was fine. He was a B-rank adventurer and didn't need to worry. He was simply touched by such an outpouring of affection. The kids asked if Daddy wasn't happy. Gray hugged all 3 kids and said he was very happy. He thanked the children and said that they needed to buy frames for their drawings that would be fire, water, and impact-proof. The kids screamed that he was squeezing them too hard. Gray was sure he would be a wonderful father. Aria watched Gray out the window and thought she heard him say something to the children. At that moment, the kids approached her and asked what they were going to do today. Nina suggested playing. Aria smiled and said that today they would do a lingerie top stomping. Nina was delighted and said, stop, stop. She grabbed Stella's hand and ran to put the doll to bed. Isuka, Litz, and Fio told Aria that they would also like to do something. Aria was surprised. She said that if that was true, then they needed to clean the bathroom. Fio said that she and Isuka wanted to talk about fencing, but after they finished cleaning, Aria agreed. Stella, Nina, and Lutz were stomping laundry in the laundry tub, and Aria held their hands. She asked them not to fall and counted so that they would stomp in unison. Isuka and Fio were cleaning the bathroom at that moment. Suddenly, Isuka slipped and fell. Aria asked if he was okay. Fio asked how he even fell. She suggested he grab her and pull himself up. Fio wanted to check him to make sure he wasn't hurt. The little ones were scared for Isuka. Aria said they were doing well and asked them to hold on tight so they wouldn't fall like Isuka. The little ones started stamping their feet again. Aria checked the wet laundry to make sure there was no dirt left. Aria hung the laundry out in the yard and said that thanks to their teamwork, they got everything done quickly. Nina begged Aria to tell Daddy how much she helped. Lutz said Daddy would praise them all. Aria asked if everyone was tired and hungry. The food was delicious. Aria asked Stella to finish everything on her plate. Stella agreed. Isuka thanked her for the delicious food and said he would help clear the dishes. Fio said she was going shopping. Aria reminded her not to forget to buy coffee for Graysan. When Aria looked out the window, she saw Lutz feeding the cat in the yard. She and Nina watched the cat eat. At that moment, Stella approached Aria and asked to go potty. Aria said there would be nap time later, but now all the little ones were going potty. After lunch, the little ones lay down to rest. Ariamel watched them closely. At that moment, Isuka and Fio entered the room. Aria asked what was wrong. They were holding notebooks and books. Fio said they really wanted to become adventurers. Aria didn't understand what was going on. She said she wanted the children to work in the city, like at a store or in a guild, instead of becoming adventurers, where it was dangerous. She asked what the children thought of that proposal. Isuka replied that they wanted to become strong and help Graysan with his work. Fio said they would study fencing and magic with Graysan, so Aria didn't have to worry about them. Isuka added that they needed to learn to read and write first. He asked if Aria could teach them. Ariamel reflected on the fact that these two teenagers were already deciding for themselves what kind of future they wanted. Aria smiled and agreed. She said, reading and writing first, and then everything else. Fio said, thank you. At that moment, Lutz tugged Aria's hand. She was surprised that he was already awake. Fio said she had pieces of paper and charcoal writing sticks in her hands. She asked Lutz if he wanted to try. Nina and Stella woke up at that moment. Nina crawled to Lutz and asked what he was doing. Lutz was humming and scribbling. Aria asked the little ones if they wanted her to teach them how to write Dad or Daddy. She was sure that Graysan would be happy about this. The little ones sat in a row and began writing diligently. Nina said she'd write Daddy. Aria admired how busy the little ones were. Isuka said that they would write it too. Aria suggested giving Graysan a surprise. The protagonist lay in bed surrounded by sleeping little ones. He sat up carefully, looked at the wall with drawings, and decided that today he needed to buy some frames. Aria ran into the protagonist in the hallway. She asked him about waking him up. She only wanted to make breakfast and suggested Gray sleep some more. Graysan replied that he always left breakfast for her, so he decided to help this time. Ariamel smiled and thanked him for his help. They prepared breakfast together. Gray asked Aria if he had prepared too much. He said that the babies were growing, so everything would be fine. Fio ran into the kitchen, apologizing for oversleeping. Fio was very surprised that Graysan was in the kitchen. Aria wished her good morning, and Gray said Fio was on time. He asked if she could wake the others. Aria said her hair was a mess. Had Fio gone to bed late? Fio blushed and said she would go wake the others. The sleepy babies came through the door. Stella was forcibly dragging Lutz, who was dozing off. She said she wanted to sleep herself. Aria praised the babies for getting up on their own. Gray said he would go help the babies wash up. Aria said she'd finish setting the table by the time they all returned. The protagonist gave the command, forward to the battlefield. He began washing Nina with water. Stella washed herself. He also had to wash the sleeping Lutz in his arms. When the protagonist emerged from the bathroom with the babies, they were all soaking wet. Aria laughed and said the babies had given him trouble. Gray said Aria didn't have to cook him lunch today. Ariamel asked why. Gray replied that he wouldn't be taking on any quests today. He suggested they all eat together in town. The babies woke up immediately. Aria was surprised. The babies couldn't believe their daddy was taking the day off. Gray patted their heads and said he wasn't joking. Stella asked if she could come along. Gray replied, of course, because it was a family outing. He understood why Stella asked. She was afraid that people would look at her strangely because of her appearance. If anyone said anything bad about his family, Gray would cut out their tongues. Aria patted Stella on the head and said it would be great if they all went for a walk together. This reminded the protagonist of an old conversation with Hilsaria. During their conversation, a stern guard approached and reported a suspicious man who looked like an elf merchant. Gray then asked, what do you mean, someone who looks like an elf merchant? Graysan wouldn't allow that now. He told Stella that he was the only cause for concern. Vampire blood was nothing compared to the protagonist's bandit face. He couldn't understand why he was always reported to the guards. The guards stopped the strolling family. The guard sternly asked the protagonist whose children these were, if he wasn't the kidnapper. The children's parents should be worried about them. Gray, with a stern expression, replied that he was the children's parent. The guards were surprised. The guard said the children looked nothing alike. Gray replied that family members sometimes looked nothing alike. The guard added that one girl even had purple hair. Gray asked if something was wrong with her. The guard was confused. He said that no matter how Gray threatened them, their job was to protect citizens. If the protagonist wanted to say something, they should go to the police station. Ariamel couldn't stand it any longer and sternly apologized for interrupting. She said that everything Graysan said was true. They were all his children, and they were one family. She clarified with the guard that by his standards, anyone wearing normal clothes was a citizen, right? So she asked them to leave them alone. The guards were at a loss for words. Nina and Lutz hugged the protagonist's legs and yelled at the guards not to hurt their daddy. Isuka and Fio stood before him. Gray silently apologized to the children for looking like this. Aria took Gray's hand and offered to go. She said that when they were dressed in rags, these guards didn't care about them. Later, Aria calmed down and apologized to the protagonist. She said she was just nervous. He thanked her for her help and said that everything is fine. He said he was supposed to protect the children, but it turned out the opposite. He was once again convinced that helping these children was the best decision of his life. And the innkeeper and his daughter, Lena, were speechless. Gray asked if they were too surprised. The innkeeper replied, no, or rather yes. Lena added that it would be strange not to be surprised. Gray asked what was strange about that. The children were sitting on the protagonist's arms and neck. The older children went to talk to Lena. The innkeeper asked if these children were the reason for buying the house. Gray replied that it wasn't just them. He explained that everything had come together perfectly. Finances and children. Gray had wanted to settle down in the city before. The innkeeper said the protagonist had done something no one expected from someone with his face. Gray said the face thing was unnecessary. The innkeeper suggested the children settle down wherever they felt comfortable. He called Lena and asked her to set the table. A little later, the children were sitting at the table and eating. Aria said everything was delicious. Nina added, delicious. Aria asked Lena to share the recipe. Lena said, of course. She was surprised that Aria could write and said it was wonderful. Gray told the innkeeper that it had improved compared to the time he lived there. The innkeeper replied that it was all because Gray shared food with his family. He was surprised that the protagonist didn't know this. Gray thought about it. Simply food multiplied by delicious food equals delicious food. Now he understood why he had gained weight lately. The innkeeper laughed and said that if anything happened, he could come to him. As an older and more experienced parent, he would generously offer advice. A few days later, Aria wished Gray-san a good day. The protagonist noticed that Aria was in a good mood. He wondered if something had happened. Aria said that today she was going grocery shopping with Lena. Nina shouted they would play sometime. Gray thought about how they had already become friends. Evening. The protagonist hurried home because he was curious about what would be for dinner. The innkeeper met the protagonist and wondered why he was so early. Gray replied that he had finished work for the day. The innkeeper shouted that Lena and Ariamel were walking together. He said that the girls were going to the store a little further. On the way, they met two young men who offered to have tea at a cafe. The girls refused. One of the guys said that they would not do anything to them. Another guy added that they just wanted to chat. Gray and the innkeeper approached the girls from behind. He said that they also wanted to chat. Gray added that the guys should listen carefully. Lynn's father asked the guys not to let them down because they had no choice. The girls were very surprised when they saw the defenders. They told the girls to go home and cook dinner. The men went to have a heart-to-heart talk with the guys. They sat the guys down across from them and told them not to do that again. The guys lowered their heads, begged for forgiveness and mercy. They promised that it would never happen again and asked that their families be spared. Gray didn't understand what the guys were talking about. They let the guys go and ran away from the inn. Gray came out of the inn and saw Ariamel. He said that they shouldn't have waited for him. Aria apologized for causing trouble. Gray replied that it was nothing. It's normal when family members help. Ariamel tried to justify herself. Gray said that when he saw how she interacted with Lena, he was happy. He was glad that he had introduced the girls. He wanted her to always be happy, so her apologies and reserve worried him. He asked permission to spoil Aria, like Lena. The door opened and all the children were standing in the threshold. Nina thought Gray was talking about her, and she rushed to him, asking, "What's up, Daddy?" Gray asked if Nina liked being spoiled. That made him happy. He hugged Nina and said he would spoil her a lot. Nina said okay. Stella and Lutz also rushed into Gray's arms. They screamed to be spoiled too. Isuka and Fio didn't have time to say anything before Gray approached them and hugged them tightly. Ariamel blushed and shyly asked if she could count on a hug too. Gray told her to come to him. He hugged all the children and was the happiest. Another day. Gray met Lena in town. She was going shopping. Lena said there was a rumor going around town that if anyone hung around her or Ariamel, two vile men would come for them. That's why no one bothered them. Gray replied that they were decent citizens and hadn't harmed anyone. Suddenly, Isuka appeared with a stick in his hand. He wanted to strike the protagonist but missed. Gray stepped aside, and Isuka fell to the ground. Gray said, "That's why you can't close your eyes when you strike. You should always look at your opponent." Isuka wiped the dirt from his face and replied, "Yes, sir." The protagonist remembered Ariamel's words about teaching Isuka and Fio fencing. She said the children were good at helping around the house and were eager to learn to read. He thought Aria was still reluctant to support the idea, but they were able to come to an agreement. The protagonist decided to put off magic until the children learned to read. Otherwise, it would be pointless. He believes he has nothing to teach someone who isn't serious about learning. These children are the kind who have the desire but haven't had the opportunity. As soon as the opportunity arises, they'll jump at it. Gray told Isuka to rest a bit and said it was Fio's turn. Fio agreed. The Church of the Holy Kingdom of Storia. The bishop told the young man that the time was almost up. Preparations for departure should be completed. The boy replied, "Okay." The bishop said he'd send someone for the boy. They just have to wait a bit. As they left the room, the bishop told the servants to prepare the carriage. The servants replied, "Yes, sir." The knight inquired about the young man. The bishop answered, as always. There was an oracle's order to take care of this gloomy child. The knight said the boy's strength was genuine, Although the boy had never held a sword before, he had managed to reach a level above that of an average knight in just 3 months. The bishop asked if their next saint was coming. As far as he remembered, she was in the neighboring country, in the city of Bastok. The bishop said that the boy needed to quickly reach the level of a holy knight. Other countries had already learned that the hero had been chosen. The knight tried to say something, but the bishop rudely ordered him to watch his language, lest they be overheard. The knight obediently lowered his head and replied, yes. The bishop thought the saint came from a wealthy merchant family. It was odd that both the hero and the saint were orphans. This made it possible to take them under the wing of the church without attracting attention. The bishop said that they were going to greet Saint Aria Melsama. The knight agreed. The knight thought it wouldn't be a greeting, but simply a kidnapping. After all, the saint was only a child, so he didn't expect any resistance. Everyone boarded the carriage and set off. Despite Ariamel's objections, he teaches both Isuka and Fio swordsmanship. Meanwhile, in the neighboring holy kingdom of Storia, Ariamel was recognized as a saint. The protagonist sat reading a book about a hero and a saint. Isuka overheard the protagonist's thoughts aloud and asked if Gray-san had said anything. Gray replied, no. He asked Isuka what he thought of the hero and the saint. Isuka replied, nothing specific. Gray asked Fio the same question. Fio replied that they should be the ones to save the future of this world. She said it sounded global, more like a fairy tale. Gray thought the main character and heroine, like Fio and Isuka, must have a special lineage. But judging by the children's reactions, they weren't interested at all. There was a chance they knew nothing about it, though. He decided to find out about it later. Fio whispered to Isuka that Gray-san was deep in thought. Perhaps something had happened? Isuka replied that he knew nothing. Yesterday, on the way to hand in the quest, Amelia asked Gray to stop by Valkyrie's for a minute. Gray didn't understand what was going on. She asked him to simply follow her quietly. Someone greeted him at Valkyrie's house. Kasha apologized for the suddenness and asked if he could listen. Gray asked if this was something they couldn't discuss in the guild. Kasha replied that there were too many people there. She asked him to sit down and offered tea. Gray said he could talk without tea and asked her to tell everything. Kalsaria asked if he had heard about the hero's story from the leader. Gray replied, something about an oracle. Kalsaria continued. She said that this hero had come here from the holy kingdom of Storia. For some reason, a path for the journey had been paved through the forest. The forest fairies had reported this to her. Gray said he'd heard that the elves, the forest dwellers, could understand fairies. He asked how the fairies knew the hero was coming. Kalsaria replied that the hero was a special existence for the fairies. They knew about him the moment he entered. Gray asked if the hero was coming alone. Kalsaria replied that the hero was not alone, but she didn't know how many people were in his company. Gray asked why he'd been told this information. Kasha reminded him that they'd declined the hero's offer to join his party. They didn't know what was going on, so they wanted to be prepared. She said they couldn't trust the city lord. Amelia said they thought the protagonist could help them if necessary. Kasha added that Amelia had insisted on Gray's candidacy. The protagonist replied that he wasn't refusing, but he thought of them as comrades. Gray thought the fact that the procession was avoiding roads was very suspicious. There was a chance they wanted to do something to Isuka and the other children. He needed to abandon the missions and stay home with the children. He asked Amelia, Kasha, and Kalsaria if anything bad happened to him, to take care of the children. The girls replied that they promised. Gray wondered if the hero would die if his head was cut off. Present time at the protagonist's home. Gray said that Ariamel was running late. Fio suggested that the children might have trouble sleeping. Gray replied that he would go check. In the room, he saw all 4 sleeping soundly. He carefully covered them all with a blanket. Isuka followed the protagonist upstairs and asked where his sister was. Gray replied that she had fallen asleep with the others and should not be woken. They went downstairs and continued their activities. Gray looked at Fio and Isuka and thought how diligent they had been lately. If the hero's goal was to contact the children or the girls, he knew that in any case, he could only do one thing, protect the children at all costs. Someone knocked on the door. Fio asked if there was a guest. Gray said he would open it so the children wouldn't be distracted from their studies. Fio agreed. When Gray approached the door, he readied his weapon for an attack. He asked who it was. A voice behind the door said there was news. When Gray opened the door, Amelia was standing there. He asked her if she was alone. Amelia answered, "Is that a problem?" He replied that it was fine and invited the guest in. Amelia said she would be happy to come, but Kasha asked her to return quickly. Amelia said that the hero had already left the forest. If they headed straight to the city, they would arrive in less than half a day. She took something from her pouch and handed it to the protagonist as a backup. These were magical communication items. These items couldn't transmit messages, but if one concentrated, the other stone would glow. She gave the protagonist a stone to use if necessary. She promised to come to their aid immediately. Gray thought they hadn't had such items before, when they were on the same team. These items are usually used when exploring dungeons. With this item, one can find the general location of an ally. These items are not very expensive, so many adventurers use them as good luck charms. Gray thanked Amelia and told her to use her item too if anything happened. Amelia replied that she was counting on Gray. She said goodbye and left. The protagonist thought about how he had been alone for so long that he didn't know about this item. He should buy one for Isuka and the other children. The children asked who came. The protagonist replied that it was Amelia. They talked, and she left. Theo asked Gray about being on the same team with Amelia. Was she the girl who had recently visited? Gray replied that it was that swordswoman, the blonde one. Theo opened her mouth and said that she was a very beautiful girl. Gray poured tea for everyone and offered them a cup. Theo thanked him. She asked Gray-san about Amelia being his girlfriend. The protagonist almost choked on his tea in surprise. Theo said she shouldn't have asked. Gray replied that everything was fine. He asked why she thought that. Theo explained that the last time Amelia came, she looked at Gray-san with a distinctive look. Gray wiped his face and said that they had dated when they were on the same team, but they broke up a long time ago. She was his ex-girlfriend. Theo asked why they broke up. Isuka pulled Theo up and said that such a question shouldn't be asked. But Gray replied that there was no specific reason. They simply broke up, something that often happens. Theo tried to continue the conversation again, but Gray abruptly said that he wouldn't say anything more. He thought he could understand some admirer of Amelia, but who would be interested in such a character? The door opened and a shaggy Aria ran in. She shouted that she would make dinner now. Isuka told her that they had already eaten. Aria calmed down. She just had a long dream about something. She sat down and became embarrassed because of a mess on her head. Now she'll go and wash her face. Gray said she had amazing hair. Theo said he shouldn't say that. It would make her feel embarrassed. The protagonist thought, wouldn't it be better if the girl knew about this? Twilight. Gray came to the kitchen and offered Aria help with dinner. She said that she could handle it alone today. The protagonist thought that maybe it was adolescence. Children were playing in the yard. Gray waved to them. When Gray turned around, he saw the innkeeper holding a saucepan in his hands. Gray asked why he came. Did Lena finally kick him out? Lena's father told the protagonist to shut up because he had brought them soup. He handed over a pot of soup and said he'd never seen the house before, but it was a very nice house. The innkeeper leaned over and told the protagonist that some people had been asking about Ariamel at the inn and guild tavern. They were dressed like mercenaries or adventurers, but they behaved very decently. He asked Gray to be careful. Gray thanked him for the information. The innkeeper went and said there was no need for thanks, because Lena and Ariamel were friends, practically family. Helping was a natural thing. Gray thought he was being shy. Aria asked what kind of pot Gray was holding. Nina said Lena's dad had come by and brought some soup. Gray said he'd shared his soup with them. Aria was overjoyed. Gray said they could bring something next time too. Aria agreed. She told everyone to wash their hands and go get some soup. Someone knocked on the door again. Gray stopped Aria and said he'd open it himself. He asked her not to show her face at the door. Ariamel paused. Gray said he'd be out but might return late, so he asked her to put the little ones to bed without him. Ariamel understood everything. Gray, from behind the closed door, asked who had come at such a late hour. From behind the door, they apologized for the late-night visit. The guests explained that they were members of a mercenary order called the Night Mist Hawk. They said they'd come on behalf of the aristocrats and were looking for a girl named Ariamel. Did anyone in this house know someone like that? It was obvious why the aristocrats would use mercenaries to find people. After all, there wasn't a war going on right now. If they were going to use someone, it would be better to hire a high-ranking adventurer who wasn't constrained by law or private troops. An adventurer's ID is simply an adventurer's card issued by a guild. It can be used in different countries, and contracts are signed with it in accordance with each country's laws and adventurer law. Failure to comply with the laws can result in a fine or even disqualification. When it comes to high-ranking adventurers, there's a rule that more attention should be paid to working with the aristocracy and maintaining connections with the royal family. Someone asked to open the door. Gray knew that mercenaries had no such restrictions and worked only on the trust of individuals. They had strong ties to the client's noble family. Perhaps they knew he was an adventurer. Otherwise, if he pretended to be one and didn't say anything unnecessary, they wouldn't expose him. The only thing he was sure of was that they couldn't be trusted. Gray said he would open the door. Two young guys in armor stood on the threshold of the house. One thanked the protagonist for opening the door. The other said they wanted to talk about a girl named Ariamel. Gray immediately asked what the name of the person who hired them was. One of the guys replied that they had promised not to reveal their name to strangers. Gray replied that he wouldn't tell them anything then, and asked them to leave. He knew that keeping the client's name secret and searching for people was prohibited. Did these guys think that if they said they were sent by an aristocrat, everyone would immediately tell everything? Unfortunately, the protagonist wasn't going to answer, even if the client was the imperial family. The guys got angry. Gray looked at them sternly. The guy asked, "Does that mean he won't tell them anything?" Gray answered, "Exactly." He said he knew they were mercenaries, and they were very unaccustomed to being refused. Another guy asked what the protagonist meant by that. Gray answered, "Nothing." He said that if the young man had any more questions, they should choose another day, since his children had gone to bed, and it was time for the guests to leave. Gray said he didn't want to stain the house where the children lived with blood. The guys whispered, and one of them tried to peer over the protagonist's shoulder. Gray glared at them again. They said that was all for today, but they would visit him again tomorrow. Gray thought that the mercenaries' friends were probably standing at the back door of the house. But the house originally belonged to a female group, so both the front and back doors were very strong, and the windows in the house were protected with magic. Breaking into the house was simply impossible. The mercenaries were most likely waiting for a moment of calm to strike. If their target was Aria, then perhaps they would leave her alive and silence the others. But Gray preferred to attack unexpectedly, so this time he would let them get away. Amelia ran around the corner, dragging one of the mercenaries. From the perspective of the Night Fog Hawk, one mercenary said that the information about the man was confirmed. Apparently, he really was keeping a girl at home. The second mercenary agreed with him. This guy looked like a real bore. At first glance, he seemed like a seasoned adventurer, but in reality, he was a low-level hooligan. One mercenary said the protagonist had told him the children had gone to bed, but they were unlikely to be his own children. The second mercenary assumed the children were slaves or orphans, since the girl was also an orphan. He couldn't understand why the protagonist was holding the girl captive. The first mercenary thought they had a noble goal. The second mercenary thought it was something disgusting, something that shouldn't be spoken about out loud. He said that in any case, if they reported this to the bishop, that would be the end of the mission for today. He told the first mercenary that when Selma's men joined them, they could come back again. Gray followed them and heard the name of the client. He wondered out loud if that was the man's name. The mercenaries turned and asked who it was. Gray stood behind them, his expression crazed. He said they were planning to leave, leaving behind trash. One of the mercenaries shouted at Gray, asking what he had done to their comrade. Gray was dragging one of the mercenaries unconscious. The protagonist told the mercenary to speak more quietly. He could hear him perfectly well. Gray said that the mercenary's condition made it immediately obvious he was a poor warrior. He threw the mercenary to his comrades and said he was still alive. He handed him over so the mercenaries could answer his questions. Gray asked why the mercenaries were looking for Aria. When they found her, what were they going to do with her? Where was the bishop? One of the mercenaries thought that since he found out about the bishop, they could not leave him alive. Gray raised his sword and loudly asked why they weren't answering. He didn't wait for an answer and struck his opponent. He severed the arm of one of the mercenaries. The second mercenary thought the protagonist was too fast. While he was thinking, the protagonist struck and severed the head. Aria ran around the corner and asked Gray if he was finished. Gray asked her about having seen everything from beginning to end. Aria replied, yes, indeed. He dealt with them rather mercilessly. Gray replied that the mercenaries needed no mercy. All those who encroached on the peace of his children were his enemies. If someone is going to take something from another person, then they must be prepared to have something taken from them too. The protagonist will take it anyway, no matter the cost. Aria was surprised that Gray valued his children so much. Gray asked her to be silent. He said valuing his children was a natural state for parents. Aria said he needed to find a bride quickly. She asked what about Amelia. Gray replied that he didn't know what Amelia would do to him if she heard that. Aria smiled and said that Amelia would blush and become embarrassed. She asked if he understood the warrior's position. She pointed and said that if they left the city, it would be right there. She was sure there was no mistake, because everything looked just as she had heard from the spirit. They could make a reasonable amount of noise outside. She clarified that there were 5 people, including the warriors. One of them was dressed in luxurious robes, another in a bright white plate suit, and 2 in suits like mercenaries. Gray replied that he understood and thanked her for the information. Aria was a very good archer, but she was also a first-class scout. This isn't the same as what the protagonist does, it's something else. Aria asked about them coming. She said she'd cover for the protagonist. If she returned home now, Amelia, who was watching over her house, would be angry. Gray replied that he understood and trusted her completely. The protagonist had tasked Amelia with guarding the children at his house. Amelia wanted to follow him, but he entrusted the children to her. She was as strong as he was, maybe even stronger. Aria wasn't herself that evening, but he hoped they could become friends. The outskirts of the city of Bastok. The bishop said the mercenaries had been walking for a long time. He asked if they disliked his assignments. The mercenary guard replied that there had been no new information since lunch. He said the information was that Saint Ariamel had been taken in by a local adventurer, and that they were living together. The bishop said adventurers were a worthless bunch who lived for the moment. If he was given the required sum of money, he would gladly hand over the girl. The mercenary said that if the adventurer learned the girl was a saint, he might take advantage of this and make excessive demands. The bishop replied that if that happened, there were many ways to deal with it. He said they simply needed to check if the saint was in the adventurer's house. That's all. After all, he had given the task to 3 mercenaries, but they were still out there somewhere. He thought he needed to quickly retrieve the saint and return to Storia. Then his future would be bright, and his dream of becoming a parishioner would come true. If negotiations failed, it would be better to simply sneak into the adventurer's house late at night and kidnap the saint. But he absolutely had to silence the adventurer. The hero sat on a stump and thought, will Ariamel also be separated from her loved ones? The knight said there was nothing worse than tedious waiting, so he had to be sent. The knight's name was Rondi, a 7th-ranked holy knight. He approached the bishop and said he was the strongest here, so why not finish this quickly? They were really nervous about not being able to take some girl. The bishop thought that if this knight was good enough, he was unlikely to be defeated by an A-rank adventurer. But he was an unrivaled womanizer and would definitely do something to the girl if sent on a mission. The bishop said. The knight was guarding him. In his absence, anything could happen. The knight replied, yes, yes. Suddenly, a voice rang out, saying that the atmosphere wasn't very conducive. The holy knights drew their swords and stood before the bishop. The bishop asked who he was and what he wanted here. Gray asked about stalkers sniffing out his daughter's whereabouts. Everyone in the clearing was surprised. The bishop apologized and said the protagonist had confused them with someone else. Gray told the bishop not to pretend. He said Aria was his daughter. He asked the man in the robe if he was a bishop, right? The bishop agreed and asked if this man was the adventurer. He said he would ask, just in case, what happened to the 3 people who were supposed to visit his house. Gray smiled and asked if the bishop wanted to know. The bishop became alarmed and replied that he would refrain from specifying. The remaining 2 mercenaries tensed. One of them shouted for the bishop to find out what had happened to their comrades. The bishop sternly ordered them to remain silent. The mercenaries themselves were to blame for what had happened, for failing to follow simple orders. The bishop asked, what is the protagonist's goal? Gray replied that he wanted to get even with them. The bishop asked again, get even? He asked how much they had to pay. Gray got angry and asked, what? The bishop asked about money. He asked how much the protagonist was willing to pay for the saint. Gray asked, Saint Aria. He realized the saint had been chosen through divination. The bishop laughed and said it would be fine if the saint wasn't a virgin. Gray asked again, what? The bishop laughed even louder and replied that there would be no problem if the protagonist slept with her. Gray became very angry, raised his sword, and shouted, die. But Rondi intercepted his blow. Rondi said, if the protagonist kills the bishop now, they'll be in serious trouble. He said he'll become the enemy instead of the bishop. The bishop was frightened. He was indignant. With a sword and against him, he said that all adventurers are the same. He shouted for Aries to protect him too and kill the adventurer. Aries took the sword in his hands, but hesitated. Rondi shouted at Aries not to be distracted. He parried the protagonist's attack again. Gray thought about how the hero was still a child. He didn't look like a warrior at all. He didn't know how strong the hero was, but the warrior in white armor was more skilled. He knew Aria hadn't returned yet, which meant the hero and the holy knight would be together against a single adventurer. He needed time to figure out what was wrong with the hero. Rondi punched Aries in the face and shouted at him to get out of the way. Rondi had a crazy look in his eyes. He said he would deal with the protagonist alone, and he ordered Aries not to make any unnecessary movements. The bishop shouted, what is Rondi doing? The knight shouted at the bishop to shut up. He replied that he wouldn't allow a mere adventurer to defeat a holy knight and a brave man. He declared that when he killed the adventurer, he would take the saint before returning. Gray became very angry when he heard these words. Gray shouted that he would send the knight to a god or something. He swung with all his might and said that the knight would die with joy on his face. The knight dug his feet into the ground. Aria sat in a tree and saw flashes of light in the distance. She thought that was more or less it. She nimbly jumped from tree to tree, like a squirrel. Rondi desperately parried the protagonist's attacks, cursing the whole time. He was no longer sure that this was a simple adventurer. The bishop was shouting for the knight to kill the adventurer quickly. He didn't understand why the knight was taking so long. Rondi shouted for the bishop to shut up. He yelled that if the bishop didn't shut up, he would finish him off first. Rondi struck, but Gray blocked them. The knight couldn't figure out where the adventurer was aiming. Gray shouted that he was a pervert who needed to be castrated. He tried to strike the knight in the groin, but Rondi blocked it. The knight told the adventurer not to joke around. He called the protagonist a name and rushed to attack. Gray noticed the knight using body enhancement magic, but the blow sent him flying backwards. Rondi called the protagonist another name and tried to attack. He didn't expect the protagonist to use his signature move. The knight shouted that he would definitely finish the adventurer off. In anger, he said he would torture his saint first. Gray decided to use an esoteric move, vanish into the clouds, but at that moment, an arrow flew into the knight's groin. He was very surprised. What was that? At that moment, Gray delivered his signature blow to the knight with his sword. He severed the knight's head. The head rolled toward the bishop. The young hero fainted at the sight. The mercenaries lowered their swords. The bishop said he didn't want to die here. How could they escape? Gray would never have thought the knight would try to attack him so openly. He was surprised, so he delayed his blow slightly. Aria caught up with him and said she was finished. Gray praised her for her work. Gray approached the bishop and apologized for keeping him waiting. The protagonist asked if the bishop had time to pray to his god. The bishop was frightened by the protagonist's face. Gray said that the bishop would now go to the place where his beloved god resided. The protagonist asked him to smile, as this was a joyful event. The bishop tried to stop the adventurer. He said that if the protagonist killed him, the church would not remain silent. He offered the protagonist money for his life. Gray replied that he did not need it. The bishop said he would give money for the girl. Gray replied that he was not interested. The bishop offered the position of holy knight. He said that with the protagonist's strength, he could take 4th or 2nd place. Gray said that if the bishop paid compensation, he would let him go. The bishop was delighted and said, money after all? He said that this was not bad at all. Money is a very important thing. It helps one survive in this world. He clarified how much he needed to pay. Gray said that this was the most interesting thing. He said that 4 people had already paid him. The mercenary was surprised and said, Really? The second mercenary threw his sword aside and said he would never touch the adventurer and his family again. He begged for mercy. Gray asked what the mercenary was so afraid of. He said that according to their doctrine, if they follow God's teachings and do good deeds, they will find eternal happiness after death in a world without hunger and war. He clarified that if they have no dark thoughts, they will be able to die with a calm soul, and if they do, then the mercenaries will have to atone for their sins even after death. Therefore, as compensation, he will take their lives. Gray chopped off the heads of 2 mercenaries with one movement. He said they will have an easy death. Gray thought that there was no need to make a grave mistake and show mercy to enemies. Protecting them was also foolish. The bishop screamed in fear. He begged and pleaded for mercy. He shouted that he did not want to die. Gray said that the bishop should not ask him for this. God was already tired of waiting for the bishop to come to him. Aria stopped Gray. She said there was something she needed to give to the bishop before he died. She held Teutonic crosses on chains. The bishop couldn't believe his eyes. Aria said they belonged to his escort. She said she'd let the horses go, so there was no cart. She asked if the bishop had any travel stones. At that moment, she threw the crosses at the bishop, and Gray struck him, cutting off his arm. The stones fell to the ground. Travel stones are magical equipment. The name says it all. The price of such stones is very high, and the distance you can travel with them is only 2 kilometers. The stones are single use, which is a poor value for money. Gray thought the bishop was trying to escape because he was hiding the stones. He called the bishop annoying and said it was time to deal with him. The bishop tried to stop the protagonist, but before he could speak, his head rolled across the clearing. Gray approached the hero and asked him if he had regained consciousness. He asked him not to pretend to be asleep. Aries rose from the ground. Gray said he would ask a few questions, and the hero should answer them. Gray asked if the hero's name was Aries. The hero agreed. Gray guessed that the hero had turned 13 this year. He thought he was the same age as Aria, still a child. Aries explained that when he was born, he was abandoned at the door of an orphanage. Therefore, he does not know his real age. Gray asked, "Is it the orphanage of Storia?" Aries answered, "No, Kodar." Aria asked, "The kingdom of Kodar? This country is located next to the holy country of Storia. 1/3 of the country's territory is covered by forests." Gray asked why Aries became a warrior of Storia if he was originally from Kodar. Aries explained that one day a group of people came to the orphanage, calling themselves emissaries of the holy country of Storia. One of the robed men asked if he was Lord Aries. It was the murdered bishop. He then said that by God's will, Aries was chosen as a hero, and now he would go with them to the sacred land of Storia. Aries asked to take not only himself, but also his friends. The bishop said that only Lord Aries was allowed to enter the holy capital. He promised that the sacred land would look after the rest of the orphans. The bishop said that whether Aries wanted it or not, they would force him to go with them. Otherwise, there would be no guarantee of safety for the other children. A girl named Mia, who was sitting next to Aries, began to cry. Aries didn't know whether these people would keep their promise if they were prepared to take him away by force. He agreed to go. The bishop said, "Well done, Lord Aries." The bishop asked him to promise that if anyone ever asked where the hero was from, he should always answer Storia. If Aries disobeys, he understands what could happen to his friends. The robed men took Aries from the orphanage. Aries said he had come to Bastok to retrieve the saint chosen by God's will. He thought the same thing would happen to the girl named Ariamel as he had. Gray said everything now became clear to him. He asked what fighting skills Aries possessed. Aries replied that Rondi had taught him more than just a knight. He said he couldn't compare to Rondi as a member of the Holy Knight class. Gray looked at Rondi's head and wondered, is that what Holy Knights are like? He imagined them to be stronger. The Holy Knights of Storia were renowned even in the city of Bastok. They had an order of strength, with only Knights of the Sacred Armory achieving 5th place and above. Gray didn't know what to do with this boy. He wanted to spare his life and send him home. Aria begged him to resolve the matter later because she really wanted to go home and sleep. Gray agreed. He said it was late and offered Aries accommodations at an inn. Aries agreed. Gray knew he could invite Aries to his home, but he would have to consult with his children first. Gray checked on the bishop and found a bag of money. Aria called the protagonist a heretic. Gray asked why a heretic? He said the dead don't need money. Besides, it's compensation for emotional distress. He said that if the robbers are dealt with, their treasures can be disposed of. It's almost the same thing, especially since the bishop himself offered the money to the protagonist, and money is always needed. Aria answered, I understand. She said that sending this child home also requires money. Gray said it was wonderful that she understood him. The protagonist picked up the movement stones from the ground. Aria asked the protagonist if he would sell the stones. Gray answered, no. He said he would move the bodies to their appropriate places, and the goblins would do their work later. He moved the bodies of the dead and used the movement stones. Judging by the way the bishop was sneaking around in search of Ariamel, one can assume he didn't speak with the higher-ups in the city of Bastok. If he had, he could have sent a more powerful detachment. If this is truly true, then Storia will not be able to make a fuss over the bishop's disappearance. No one will send another group without permission and take the missing guards and the hero with them. Gray asked Calsaria to join Amelia and the others. He said that he would put Aries up at the inn for now. Calsaria waved and said goodbye. The inn. Gray told the innkeeper that he wanted to put this guy up in a room. He was willing to pay for 2 nights in advance. The innkeeper agreed and said that guests rarely came to them so late at night. He said he was surprised. Gray showed Aries to his room. He warned Aries not to pay attention to any strange people. Aries replied that he understood everything. Gray told Aries to rest, and he would come for him tomorrow. Aries said he wanted to thank Gray for paying for him. He promised to definitely return everything. Gray said that nothing needed to be returned, because it was not his money. Aries replied that he understood. Gray left the hotel and headed home. Calsaria said, "Welcome back." She said she told the others everything. Amelia couldn't believe Gray had saved the hero. Kasha added that she wasn't surprised at all. It was Gray, after all. He'd always been like that. Gray thought Amelia would be angry. She asked what to do next. What did he plan to do with the hero? Gray replied that he would first consult with the children, and if they were okay with it, he would move the boy into their house. He said that Aries had been shared with his friends back home. Aries would probably want to meet them, and the protagonist wanted to fulfill that wish. But this was all after gathering information, because the protagonist had some concerns. Amelia closed her eyes and said that everything was clear to her. She said that if Gray needed help, to let them know. They would do everything in their power. Gray apologized and thanked them. Amelia replied that he was their comrade. There was no need to be shy. Gray suggested that they all go inside. Otherwise, they would be standing outside forever. Amelia became shy and replied that she didn't know. Kasha asked Amelia if it was time for her to give up. She said it was time to overcome this wall. Gray thought about it. The wall? Amelia blushed deeply and said that she would go home after all. Calsaria asked Kasha if Amelia was really running away again. Kasha replied that there would be a military court tomorrow. Calsaria was surprised. What? She said that she didn't want to go. She'll ruin everything anyway. Kasha asked Calsaria not to say that. She apologized to Gray and said that it was time for them to go home too. The girls went to catch up with Amelia. When Gray entered the house, he saw Aria sleeping on the couch. He quietly announced that he was already home. He asked why she hadn't gone to bed yet, but when he came closer, he noticed Aria was sleeping sitting up on the couch. He picked her up and carried her into the room. Gray looked at her face, and it seemed to him that she was having a bad dream. He knew that he would come to save her, even if it was just a dream. Aria dreamed that she was standing alone in darkness. It was dark and cold. She didn't understand what this place was. How did she get here? She wanted to get home as soon as possible. The little ones at home were hungry. She wondered if there was food at home now. She knew she was the eldest in this family, so she had to be strong. She didn't understand how she would return home. Suddenly, she saw the completely burned out hut where she used to live. Her parents were dead, but she found the children and started a new life. Although they had no food or money, they were happy because they could rely on each other. There was nothing else left. She witnessed the horror when bandits burst into the house. One of the bandits grabbed Nina, and Lutz tried to hold him back. How Aria tried to tear the baby from the bandit's arms. She saw the bandit throw Lutz to the floor, where he fell. Another bandit grabbed Aria by the clothes and ordered her to be quiet. He said that from that day on, she would be their slave. Shackles around her neck, blows with a whip, violence from the men. She was kept on a chain like a dog. They fed her scraps. A sudden voice said that she was a saint, chosen by the prophecy of a god. A man pointed to a boy and said that he was also chosen. The man asked her to love and cherish each other. The guy who had abused her and kept her on a chain apologized. A scream rang in her head. Enough, enough, enough. She begged him to give her babies back. Tears streamed from her eyes. She wished death on everyone who had hurt her. She cursed everyone. She said these words and died. She plunged a knife into her stomach. She saw the faces of the children. Isuka, Fio, Stella, Nina, Lutz. She asked for forgiveness for not being able to protect them. Here she was alone and it was cold all around. Suddenly she felt warm. She asked her parents if they were keeping her warm. Ariamel opened her eyes and saw Gray. He apologized for waking her. He asked about the nightmare she had. She was not herself. Aria replied that she did not remember. Gray reminded her that he told her to go to bed and not to wait for him. He said that if you sleep on the couch, you can catch a cold. Aria apologized and said she wanted to tell him something when he returned. Gray asked what? Ariamel smiled and said, "Welcome back." Gray remembered returning home in a past life in a gloomy mood. A home where no one was waiting for him. Only memories that hurt his heart. He doesn't want to remember them, but he can't forget them either. He remembers everything at a certain moment. Insignificant, stupid, but dear and warm memories. Out of habit, he continued to say out loud that he was home or that he was leaving. There were no people nearby who could answer him. Clearly, he simply missed family. Gray held Aria in his arms, smiled, and said he was home. She smiled back even wider. The protagonist was determined to be family to these children. Let these ordinary words remain as they are. These are his true thoughts. Amelia teaches the little ones to dress themselves. She asked Nina if she could dress herself. Nina replied, "Yes, I can." Lutz pulls on her sock. Stella looks sternly at her feet. Nina sits, puffing and pulling it on. Gray passes by and Nina asks to put on her sock. Amelia stops him and tells her to try it herself. Gray said he'll just watch. Nina holds a toy in her hands and asks for help putting on her sock. Gray agrees. Amelia stops him. Gray asks Nina to try a little more. Nina insistently reminds him about the sock. Amelia stops him again. Nina looks at Amelia and sighs. Gray carries Aria up to her room. She asks if they can all sleep in his room tonight. She's sure the others are already there. Gray was surprised. When he entered his room, he saw the children sleeping peacefully in his bed. Gray put Aria to bed. She thanked him and told him to lie down in the empty spot. Gray agreed and patted her on the head. Gray thought 7 people would be cramped in such a bed. He decided he needed to buy a bigger one so he could see the children's sleeping faces. He would take up too much space here. He thought of something that could become a bed for the children. It was a brilliant idea. Suddenly, a child's hand caught him. Nina woke up and said she wanted to pee. He needed to act calmly, quickly, without rushing. Gray asked, "Is that all?" Nina asked to be picked up. When Gray entered the room with Nina, Stella was sitting on the bed and said she also wanted to pee. The protagonist put Nina down and picked Stella up. He had to be quick like Daddy and quiet like Daddy. He thought, Nina has gone, now Stella. When he returned with Stella, Lutz was standing next to the bed. Gray asked him to wait a bit, but he noticed that Lutz had already wet his pants and there was a puddle underneath. Lutz started crying. Gray said everything was fine and he would wipe it up. He tried to calm the baby and said it was completely normal. The protagonist asked him not to worry. Everything was fine. Theory and logic don't work with small crying children. Talking about it only makes children panic even more. Gray lay in bed and couldn't sleep. He couldn't move. If he didn't wash Lutz's pajamas tonight, there would be a stain. He quietly slipped out of bed and went to wash his pants. He washed them and noticed that it was already morning. He hung them up to dry and thought he wanted to sleep. He knew that if he went to sleep, Nina and the others would attack him with hugs. And so it happened. Gray was fast asleep. Nina was jumping on him, asking for breakfast. Stella tugged at his ear and said that Aria was calling him. He decided he would become child food. Stella persistently tugged at his cheeks and repeated that it was time to eat. Isuka wished the protagonist good morning. He said that breakfast would be ready soon so they could go wash up. Gray replied that he understood and went to wash up. He tried to remember what the relationship between Isuka and Aries was like in the game. Are the main character and the hero either friends or rivals? They can't be called enemies. Gray hoped for a good relationship between the two, no matter what happened. During breakfast, Gray decided to talk to the children about someone he would need to keep an eye on. Gray said the boy's name was Aries. He hoped the children would get along with him. The protagonist asked, "Are you all okay with it?" The children leaned toward each other and exchanged glances. Nina asked, "Is there a new kid?" Aria said she agreed. Isuka replied that he agreed too. Theo replied that she did too. The position of the Holy Knight Aries is kept secret from the church. But more surprisingly, none of the children objected to the newcomer in the family. Nina and Stella offered to bring more plates. The children confidently carried the dishes, and Isuka and Theo kept them in check. Aria said that all 3 of them had helped her a lot and thanked them for their help. The children stood there with smiles on their faces. Nina asked the protagonist if they were great. Stella said they all helped. Gray hugged all 3 and said they were great. That's his privilege. The protagonist left the house and went to the bar. There were many men in the bar, and they all looked around when Gray entered. Gray approached the bar, where the bartender asked what he would like to order. Gray tossed a couple of coins and said to pour him whatever the bartender recommended. The bartender caught the coins in midair and poured something into a glass. There was a small piece of paper under the glass. Gray crumpled it in his fist and drank the contents of the glass. Then he went to the appointed place. The meeting place was still in the backwoods. Gray approached a double bench. On one side sat a man feeding pigeons, and the other was empty. Gray sat down on the empty part of the bench. The guy said that Gray was a very rare customer, and they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Gray greeted the kind informant and said he wanted him to check something. The informant replied that Gray had met him in person, so the matter was very important. He asked what he needed to check. Gray said he had adopted a child from an orphanage in Kodar. Did that orphanage still exist? If not, Gray wanted to know where the children who lived there had been taken. The informant asked, "The kingdom of Kodar? The territory is very vast, so the price would be a little high, okay?" Gray asked how much. The informant replied, 200 gold coins in advance, 200 gold coins for the reward, a total of 400 gold coins. Gray responded, and they agreed. The informant received an advance payment and said the check would take a few days. He asked not to worry, as he would not run away with the advance. Gray replied that the informant could do as he pleased. Otherwise, he would find him, dig him out from under the ground, and kill him. The informant said he was very scared, and added that he was heading off to take care of business. At that moment, all the pigeons in the square took flight. Gray was left sitting alone on a bench, and pigeon feathers were falling from the sky. A hotel. The innkeeper said that he had said Gray had been gone for a long time. He was already starting to worry about that boy. Gray asked if the innkeeper had been keeping an eye on him. The innkeeper replied that the boy had been in the room all this time. Gray was surprised. In the hallway, he met Lena. She greeted him and asked what had happened. Gray replied that he had come for Aries, who lived in the room there. Lena asked if this meant he was his friend. She asked if he lived with them. Gray replied that he had not yet. He asked Lena about her interest in that boy. Lena replied that she did not consider him a bad person, but he was somehow gloomy. He acted like an adult. Gray thought that she probably wanted to say something else. Lena said that it was time for her to go and clean up. She apologized for stopping Gray. The protagonist replied that it was okay. He knocked on the door of Aries' room. A reply came from behind the door. Come in. Gray apologized for being gone for so long. Aries tried to say something to Gray. The protagonist asked, "What's wrong?" There were mushrooms on Aries' head. He asked, "Does he look gloomy?" Gray froze and didn't know what to say. He realized that this is what Lena was asking him about. Gray asked Aries not to pay attention. He offered to go and buy everything they needed. Aries agreed. Aries was enjoying the beautiful city. He said that in Storia, he was allowed to walk from his room to the training grounds and back. He hadn't gone shopping in ages. Gray was surprised, really? Aries' gaze fell on the fruit stand. Gray noticed this and asked if he wanted some apples. Aries took an apple and said that at the orphanage where he was staying, fruit and desserts were only given out on holidays. The little apples seemed more luxurious to him than the dishes served to all the brave souls. Aries asked, "Sounds strange, doesn't it?" Gray asked again. "What?" He said that food tastes even better when eaten with family. He asked if Aries knew that. Aries remembered his friends from the orphanage and how he felt. He laughed and said, "That's right." Gray thought that ever since he met the children, eating at the table had become much tastier and more fun. He would do anything to maintain this way of life. Now he could definitely say that he was very happy. When they approached the house, Aria greeted them. She said to Gray, "Welcome back," and Gray said that he had come. Aria asked the young man if he was Aries, right? Aries was a little confused, but replied that it was nice to meet her. Aria invited him inside. Gray said that he wanted to introduce Aries to the children, and asked Aria to gather everyone in the living room. Aria replied, "Okay." She said she'd make more tea, so they could rest for now. Aries asked about this girl's name being Ariamel. In Storia, they call her a saint. Gray replied that they were his precious family. Aries looked sad. Gray said everything was fine and told them to pass. Aries agreed. Gray wondered if Aries felt guilty about bringing himself to the bishop for Ariamel. He wanted to support this boy. In the house, Fio and Isuka approached and introduced themselves. Aries remained silent. Gray wondered if this was an awkward situation and the fate of all games. Aries saw 3 little children come into the room. They were looking intently at Aries. Lutz hung on Aries' leg. Aries smiled at this. Stella was watching him intently. Aries looked at Gray as if asking him to save him. Gray pretended not to notice. Gray silently apologized to Aries because he needed to watch him a little longer. Nina asked if she was Alice's older sister. Gray tried to understand what Nina had said. Alice is Aries, that's clear. Older sister means older sister, that's also clear. He realized he didn't understand anything. Nina pointed at Aries and said that Alice was her younger brother. Aries was surprised. Fio asked Nina why she was the older sister. Nina replied that she was the first to come to this house, and Alice only came today. Now everything became clear to Gray. She thought in order. Who came to this house first? Gray said that he understood. Aries asked, "What?" Gray brought Aries home, and all the children showed a new side of themselves. Ariamel offered Aries some tea. Fio and Ariamel greeted the guests surprisingly warmly. Isuka always becomes silent when a stranger is around. Stella and Lutz never get attached to anyone, so they had already lost interest in Aries. Nina was debating whether to give the new guest a sweet or not. In the end, she ate it all herself. Gray asked Aries to choose which room he would live in. Aries thanked him and showed him his preferred room. Gray said, "Okay." Gray asked why Aries had chosen the room furthest from everyone else. He didn't need to worry about the other children. Aries replied that that wasn't why he had chosen the room. He said he just relaxes when he's on the edge. Gray was surprised. Gray turned to Aries, asking if he'd already caught his breath. He called him out for a minute. Aries replied, "Of course." Gray suggested going outside. Aries agreed. Gray thought that if he found Aries' friends from the orphanage, Aries would leave. He couldn't drag Aries along by force. All he could do now was provide temporary assistance. Gray asked if Aries knew how to use magic. Aries replied that he had a teacher in Storia. Gray replied, "I understand." Gray told Aries to take a stick and said he would train him. Gray asked him to get ready. Aries replied, "Yes." The protagonist wanted to analyze Aries' strength. Gray asked Aries not to hesitate and to hit with all his might. The protagonist understood that the Demon King might appear sooner or later. What could he do for Aries, who was destined to fight him? Aries struck, but they were predictable, and the protagonist blocked them with ease. Gray knew he needed to put into practice as many of the skills he'd acquired as an adventurer as possible. Aries' strikes were truly fast and precise, so it was hard to believe he'd only been wielding a sword for 3 months. But Aries' movements were linear, and each blow was light. Aries' face was frightened. Gray wondered if it was because he didn't want to hurt another person. He felt sorry for Aries, but he'd have to get used to it. Gray knocked the stick out of Aries' hands. He said, "That's all." Gray said he'd go tomorrow and ask to register Aries as an adventurer, and then he'd take on a suitable assignment. The protagonist told Aries to rest after dinner today. Aries said, "Okay." Isuka stood by the window, watching Aries' abilities being tested. He had a very sad expression. Aries asked about Gray being a B-rank adventurer, right? Gray replied that he had a B+. He asked, so what? Aries asked if all adventurers were as strong as him. The protagonist recalled the monsters he had fought and answered in completely different ways. Aries explained that Rondi forced him to participate in mock battles at the training center to test his strength. Aries couldn't do anything, so Rondi laughed at him, repeatedly hitting, stomping, and spitting on him. Every time Aries lost, Rondi said it was all his weakness that was to blame. Aries wondered all this time, why was he forcibly separated from his loved ones? Why did he have to endure all this? Gray thought about whether he had done the right thing by killing that holy knight. Aries asked if he would also be strong if he became an adventurer. If he became stronger, would he be able to be with Mia and the others? Gray thought that was a question that would be difficult to answer. He was sure that Aries would undoubtedly become stronger. As befits the bravest man, he will soon surpass the protagonist. But will he be able to be with his friends? That depends on what the informant tells him. In any case, Aries won't calm down, no matter what Gray tells him. But Gray still answered with a decisive yes. He said Aries should focus on his goal, but most importantly, not for the sake of being brave, but for his own sake. Aries stood up and walked toward the house. He turned to Gray and said that before dinner he would wash off all the dirt and thanked him for the training. Gray entered the house and saw Isuka. He asked what Isuka was doing there. Isuka asked if he and Fio would be training tomorrow. Gray replied that he planned to spend the entire day with Aries on guild missions, and then planned to train with him before dinner. Isuka looked sad and said, "Is that so?" Gray understood everything and found it hard to look at that expression. He offered to train with him and Fio after dinner, so I'll have to take a bath tomorrow before bed. Isuka smiled and said, "Good, now I need to train Aries. There's very little time left." But Gray can't help but pay attention to the other kids. Gray suggested they go have dinner. Isuka proudly said that he had helped prepare dinner today too. Gray replied that he couldn't wait to try. He stroked Isuka's hair, and the boy laughed. Gray asked Isuka if he had washed his hands. Isuka apologized. Everyone was sitting at the large table and eating dinner. Aria said that Isuka's head was covered in sand. Isuka was surprised. Was there any left? Gray said that he had stroked his head with dirty hands. Aria was indignant. Nina asked to be stroked too. Fio said, "You can't do that at the table." Gray replied that he had already washed his hands, just in case. Aria said, "Still can't." Aria asked Gray about Lutz peeing himself last night. Gray wondered if he had left any marks. Aria asked if she could sleep with Gray and the kids for a while. She said she was just worried that the little ones were constantly needing to go to the bathroom at night. Gray replied that her help wouldn't hurt. The protagonist asked what if he used body enhancement magic to carry everyone to the bathroom at the same time. Aria said no. She said that Gray's workload would be too much. Aria announced that she was entering Gray's room. Aries saw this and was surprised. The next morning, Aria asked if Gray could bring some tomatoes. Gray handed over a tomato and said, "Here." Aria laughed and thanked him. Aries was standing in the passage to the kitchen. Gray looked at him questioningly and wished him good morning. Aria wished him good morning too. Aries sheepishly said good morning. Gray and Aria looked at him carefully. He was acting strange. Gray said that breakfast wasn't ready yet, so he could wash his hands for now. Aries shouted that he had already left, and ran out of the kitchen. Aria asked what was wrong with him. Gray replied that he didn't know. A sleepy Fio entered the kitchen and wished him good morning. She said that Aries seemed very nervous. She saw him running and asked what happened. Gray replied that Aries simply woke up when breakfast was not yet ready. That's all. Fio asked Aria about sleeping in Gray's room. Aria replied, "Yes. Nina and the little ones often go to the bathroom at night, so she will sleep there for a while." Fio replied that she understood. She said that Aries probably misunderstood everything. Fio went to wake up Isuka. Gray asked what was wrong this morning. Aria replied, "Who knows?" Gray returned back to making breakfast with Ariamel. Nina tried to wake Stella, and Lutz stood in the doorway, sleepy as always. Gray heard Isuka and Fio rattling around on the second floor. The other children were dozing down the stairs. The house becomes noisy again when Gray starts washing the three little ones. The morning starts off restless, but having breakfast among the children is a lot of fun. Isuka, with whom Fio gets angry. Ariamel, who wipes Nina's mouth. Stella, who secretly puts something she doesn't really like on Lutz's plate. When the protagonist was alone, he rarely ate breakfast, and now his day doesn't begin without a noisy morning. Only Aries sits sadly at the table. Gray suggested that Aries wash the dishes together after breakfast. Gray said he would ask Aries to do some chores around the house, like the rest of the family. Aries said, "Family." Nina shouted that she would help you. Gray praised the little one. He said that Nina, Stella, and Lutz were skilled at carrying plates, so he could safely rely on them. Stella replied, "Rely on them." Fio and Isuka smiled. Aria said she was leaving the dishes for the kids. In the meantime, she'd make them a snack. Aries said okay. Gray announced that they were leaving. The kids wished them good luck. The protagonist wondered if he should register Aries with his real name. Perhaps Storia was already looking for him. Aries asked if that was possible. Gray replied that there were people like that in the guild, but essentially, once they registered him, they They couldn't make any changes. If Aries continues to work as an adventurer, he'll have to live with that name for the rest of his life. He needs to think about that carefully. Aries replied that the protagonist was right. Gray bought a short sword for Aries at the weapons store. His old good sword would have suited him just fine, but Gray was planning to give it to Isuka in the future. Gray announced that they had arrived. Aries asked if this was the Adventurers Guild. Gray said they should hurry inside because they needed to register Aries and take on some quests. Gray put Aries in the queue and said he would go check on the quests himself. He told Aries to come to him when he finished. He went to the request board. Gray thought that while he was with him, he should help him gain achievements. Aries could probably win a battle against a goblin or an orc. He needed to gain experience in such battles, but Aries would be an E rank. He needed to create a group and go on quests with someone. But E-rankers don't just get invited. They're simply not trusted. Gray knew he couldn't always go with him. He was a dangerous person in the city. The wolf family is suitable for team fights, which would be useful for Aries. But wolves don't attack those with different abilities due to their survival instinct. That's why wolves always avoided him. Gray wondered if he was actually bothering Aries. Suddenly, someone called out to Gray. It was Aries. He announced that he had finished registering. Gray noticed that he hadn't changed his name. Aries replied that it was because it was the only gift his parents, whom he'd never even met, had ever given him. He said that, to begin with, Aries will be accepting goblin-slaying missions for a long time. The protagonist asked if Aries had any experience fighting goblins. Aries replied that he fought goblins and orcs a few times before too. Gray said that meant minor quests could be completed as well. He suggested requeuing. A familiar voice came from behind, asking who this brat was. It was Gansus. He wondered if Gray, a lone wolf, had decided to create his own group and started training newbies. Gray asked Gansus if he was blind. He wondered if it wasn't obvious he was training a newbie. He said that, as always, Gansus had his eyes and ears in the wrong places. Gray told Gansus to be more mindful of the low level of his self-proclaimed B-rank group. Gray had heard that the other day Gansus had been handed the head of the main orc and that he'd chickened out. The protagonist couldn't believe it. He said that at this rate, there wouldn't be any adventurers left if everyone was so afraid. Gansus loudly asked, "What did Gray say?" A guy from Gansus's group yelled at the leader to stop playing around because they were in a hurry. They had been preparing for the mission for several days already. Gansus replied that he understood. He turned around and went to catch up with his group. Aries asked Gray who it was. The protagonist replied that this weirdo lacks attention, so he always picks on everyone. But Gray noticed Gansus's application form for the chief orc. But Gansus hadn't come to report his first kill at the reception desk. Sasha asked Gray about this newcomer being his acquaintance. Gray replied that he would train him for now. Sasha said that with Gray around, all missions would be easy for the newcomer. She handed over the application form and asked them to be careful. The outskirts of Bastok, Gray and Aries were walking through the forest. Gray asked Aries to stop. Aries asked, "What?" They quietly peeked out from behind the bushes. There were 3 goblins in the clearing. Gray said that these monsters were heading towards the city. He told Aries to kill the goblins when they got close, but it had to be done quickly before they made a noise or started resisting. Aries prepared to attack. The goblins came very close to the bushes where the heroes were hiding. Suddenly, Aries jumped out of the bushes and rushed to attack. The goblins didn't even have time to squeak, and their bodies lay on the ground, completely cut up. Aries asked Gray how it went. Gray replied that everything was fine. Today's movements were different from those they had used yesterday during training. In a good way. Gray said that they needed to point the sword at the goblins a little more decisively. Aries noticed that Gray was surprised by the fight. Aries explained that during training he was afraid of injuring the enemy. But with monsters, he felt nothing. Gray thought that fighting people and monsters were completely different things for Aries, so he'll have to gain experience before he can kill a human one day. Gray wondered if there were any bandits nearby. The protagonist told Aries that they should move on because these goblins were scouts. They survey the surrounding area to see if they might attack populated towns and villages. Aries said that the goblins wouldn't dare attack cities the size of Bastok, and could they be left alone? Gray replied that if the goblins turned their attention to Bastok, it would be tantamount to targeting his children. Gray's face changed, and he said that they would kill all the goblins. Gray exhaled and said that Aries would do it. Aries was surprised. Gray said that here are the rest of the goblins. Aries was glad that there weren't that many of them. In a large clearing, the goblins were training for the attack. They were led by 1 general, 2 warriors, and 4 orcs. There were about 50 goblins. Gray said he would help Aries. He said he would take on the huge goblins and orcs on the right side. The protagonist asked if Aries could kill the rest. Aries asked again, "Kill that many goblins?" Gray said that this time, he would imbue him with strengthening magic. First, he would lead away and kill all the most dangerous ones, and Aries, on the other side, would kill the rest. There are many goblins who run away when they realize they are losing, so we can't let that happen. Aries replied, "I understand. So the goblins will gradually run away, and their numbers will begin to decrease, right?" Gray sternly replied that that's not what he meant. He said that not a single goblin could escape. Gray commanded, "Forward." Aries tried to stop the protagonist. The goblins heard a noise in the bushes, and everyone turned in that direction. Gray emerged from the bushes and said, Now I understand why it stinks in here, and he invited the orcs to join in the fun. The goblins were delighted that there would be a battle. They ran towards the enemy like cockroaches. The goblin general laughed. On the other side, in the bushes, Aries waited for the command to attack. One of the orcs advanced to battle. He demonstrated his menacing roar, but Grey wasn't afraid. He intercepted the orc's attack with one hand and said that he was taking too long to attack. With one movement, the protagonist chopped off the orc's head. A second orc attacked with a huge hammer. Grey held the orc back with one hand and chopped off half his torso with the other. The smaller goblins were frightened. The goblin general thought that, although he had lost many of his subordinates, he held no grudge against the one standing right in front of him. After all, this man was simply amusing himself this way. Grey told the general not to make such a frightening expression, as if he were an experienced soldier. Grey went into a one-on-one duel with the general. The goblins killed many people. They didn't care who was in front of them. They simply killed to increase their numbers. The leaders charged. The smaller goblins began shouting in support of their leader, but it was no use. Blood and the remains of their leader flew toward the goblins. Aries entered the battle from the other side. He boldly and quickly killed goblins. He himself didn't believe he was capable of such a thing. He was surprised by the power of the enhancement magic. Some of the goblins tried to flee as the protagonist had warned. Aries regretted not being able to see Grey fight. Aries knew he couldn't give the goblins the opportunity to flee the battlefield, but he remembered that such a method of fighting was cowardly and based towards knights. He wondered what it meant to fight by the rules. The group of goblins stood in shock, unsure of what to do. Grey killed the general and the orc warriors. Grey thought this general looked cheerful, even after losing part of his arm. A very strange guy. There were 4 ordinary orcs on the field, and the protagonist considered leaving them to fight Aries. Aries moved incredibly quickly across the field and killed goblins. Grey thought that the newcomer was getting used to fighting, despite his complete lack of experience. What would happen to him in a few days? A goblin tried to attack Grey from behind, but was killed. After some time, Grey said that now they needed to cut off the goblin's ears and collect them. Aries agreed. Aries approached Grey and asked what he was doing. Grey replied that he was cutting off the pride of an Eldar orc. This could be sold for a good price. Grey said that it was better for Aries to remember everything he said. Aries replied, "All right." He turned away because he was disgusted by the sight. Grey held the orc general's head in his hands and said that it would be a souvenir. Aries didn't understand. Who would need such a souvenir? He obediently cut off the goblin's ears. Grey asked if Aries had collected the goblin ears. Aries replied that he had just finished and handed over 2 bags. Grey said, "Excellent," and asked Aries to take them to the guild. But then he thought that if he sent Aries alone with such loot, the guild would decide that the protagonist abandoned the newcomer alone to a herd of goblins. Everyone would think he had acted disgustingly, but no one would know it was untrue. Grey said there was no need to bring anything, and that he would inform the guild himself. Aries obediently replied, "Okay." Grey gave Aries a couple of coins and told him to drink some milk and kill time, because the conversation with Sasha could drag on. At the guild, Grey told Sasha everything. As he had expected, Sasha was angry that he had abandoned a newbie to a herd of goblins. She said she was even more angry because Grey wanted to give Aries all the credit. Wouldn't it be very suspicious for a newbie to rise so high in rank on his first day? Grey replied that he was simply supporting the newbie. He didn't care if others would doubt him. Aries really had dealt with almost all the goblins single-handedly. Sasha examined the loot and found a pair of goblin warrior ears in the bag, which surprised her. She said she would assign the task to Grey, but Aries would still rise in rank. Grey said there would be no point in that. Sasha agreed with him, but said that this time the protagonist would make the right decision. Grey said no need. He went to look for Aries. Girls were already swarming around Aries. One of them said what a cute boy he was. She asked if he wanted to join them for a while. The second girl clarified, because he was a newbie, right? She said they were D rank and could take him along on various errands. Aries blushed, but remained silent and drank his milk. Grey heard the girls calling Aries over and decided to help him. Grey saw Aries' frightened look, begging him for help. The protagonist thought that Aries was strong against the goblins, but now he is afraid of girls. Grey apologized for being late and asked if they were going home. Aries happily answered, "Yes." One of the girls said, "It's Grey." Another asked, "What's with that boy?" The girls quickly turned and left. Grey asked, "Shouldn't they have helped?" Aries was surprised. When they approached the house, they saw Amelia on the porch, shaking with fear. She was quietly mumbling something. She couldn't believe she had come to visit so suddenly, and with gifts too. She couldn't think of anything better to say. Grey asked, "What is she doing?" Amelia was scared. She turned around and said, "What a pleasant coincidence." Grey replied that she was right. He thought those weren't the kind of words one would say when standing outside someone else's house. Amelia asked, "Is today a lucky day?" The Warring Maidens, or Valkyries, are a team of adventurers who have become famous not only in the capital. This team attracts the attention of royalty because they are close to S rank. The team has also conquered the Flower Garden, but what would the fans of this team think if they saw the leader of Valkyrie acting like this? Amelia pulled herself together and asked if this was the guy Grey was talking about. Grey replied that the guy's name was Aries. He was simply a victim of Storia. Amelia asked, "Really?" She smiled and apologized for not introducing herself. She said her name was Amelia and that she worked as an adventurer in this same city. Aries asked her if she was from Team Valkyrie. He introduced himself and said that he was starting to work as an adventurer as well from today. Amelia said that if there was anything he didn't understand, he could feel free to ask her. She said that might be unnecessary since Gray was next to him. Aries bowed deeply and thanked Amelia. Gray suggested they continue the conversation inside the house. He tried to open the door, but Aria shouted at him to stop. He looked at her carefully. Fear was on her face. She quickly greeted him and said she hadn't meant to eavesdrop. Gray said that when Amelia was at their house, there was no need to be afraid to say anything to him. He asked if she would pour tea for the guests. Aria said yes and took the snack box from Gray. Aries remained standing with his box in his hands. When they entered the house, Amelia greeted everyone. The children were playing on the carpet in the living room. Gray asked about Amelia coming without Kasha today. Amelia replied that one of their team members was consulting with her today, so she had her own plans. Amelia untied the bundle and said she had brought treats. She offered the children some. Gray thanked her and said that everyone would have sweets when Aria brought tea. He asked Amelia if she would like tea too. Amelia asked if she could. Gray replied, of course. After all, she was the one who brought the treats. Amelia noticed that Gray was also happy. Aria brought tea. Gray said that Amelia had brought sweets, so they needed plates and forks. Aria replied that she would bring everything right away. She said that she wanted to make lots of sweets, so the dishes were already ready. She said that she had brewed a lot of tea so that she could ask for more. Amelia was surprised at Ariamel's strength. Amelia shouted that she also wanted to help with something. Aria replied that Amelia was a guest, so she asked her to sit down and relax. Gray commanded the children to sit on the sofa and drink tea with sweets. Theo said she would help Aria set the table. Asuka said he would go get Aries. Amelia insisted that she wanted to help. Aria repeated again that Amelia was a guest and she couldn't force her to do anything. Gray noticed that Amelia had been looking strange since she returned from the expedition. Amelia insistently demanded to be helped. Nina looked at Amelia with a surprised look. Nina and Stella took Amelia by the hands and led her to the sofa. Then they ran and sat down on the sofa with Gray. Amelia said that for a second, she thought the little girls recognized her. Gray said that they simply greeted her warmly. The girls finished setting the table and Aria said, "Bon appetit, everyone." Amelia was surprised at how nimble the little ones were. The children happily took the sweets, sat down on the sofa, and began to drink tea. The little ones had happy faces. Gray noticed that Nina had crumbs on her cheek and carefully wiped her face. He asked if she liked it. Nina answered, yes, and licked her fork. Gray noticed Amelia's strange look. Gray asked, is something wrong? Amelia answered, everything is fine. She said that he looked very much like a real father just now. Gray asked, really? Amelia asked to be understood correctly. She didn't mean that this was somehow surprising to others or that he wasn't suited to the role of a father. Amelia said that Gray was now a better father than before. Gray asked, is that so? The three little ones started asking for more sweets. Gray asked Aria if he could give them his sweets. She smiled and said, just today. Aria gave hers to Stella and asked her to eat only half. Amelia gave hers to Nina, and Gray gave his to Lutz. Isuka offered his to Theo. Theo asked, are you sure? Theo stabbed the piece with her fork and swallowed. Isuka screamed, what is she doing? Aries offered his to Isuka. Isuka replied, no need to worry about him. Nina held out her hands to Amelia. Amelia asked, what is it? Nina thanked her sister. Amelia laughed and they shook hands. Amelia replied, you're welcome. Gray thought that a small child could embarrass the most powerful adventurer in the city of Bastok. Amazing Nina. Amelia, with Nina's help, was able to help clear the dishes. She became good friends with the children through playing together. Amelia is a bad card player, so she kept drawing the Joker. The protagonist thought it was time for the children to take a bath, but it was already late. He asked Amelia if she would spend the night with them. Amelia blushed and asked again, spend the night? She said she'd better go home. The little ones looked at her with sad eyes. Stella said she didn't want her to go. Nina wanted to play with her. Those children's eyes broke Amelia's heart. Amelia gave in to the children's pressure and agreed to stay. Amelia fooled around with the little ones. Aria said the bath was ready and she could take it. Amelia replied that she would take a bath last. Gray put Lutz on his shoulders, took Stella under his arm, and said that the hot water would cool down, and it would take time to bathe the children. Amelia replied that there was no need to worry. The protagonist asked again, really? Amelia went into the bathroom. Nina fell asleep on the couch, and Gray told her that if she wanted to sleep, she should go to bed instead of forcing herself to sit there. Nina muttered in her sleep about her new sister, Amelia. Gray said that nothing could be done. Aria agreed with him. Just as they were about to leave the room, Amelia came in. Aries immediately ran off and wished everyone good night. Amelia asked why everyone was there. She thanked her for the bath, and thanked Ariamel for the pajamas. She asked him not to look at her like that, because she was shy. Gray apologized and turned away. Ariamel said that Amelia was very beautiful. Amelia asked, is she beautiful? Amelia had long been complimented on her appearance, but she usually ignored them or responded modestly. That's why Gray had never seen her smile at a compliment. But there was one such moment. When someone complimented Amelia on her beautiful red dress, she blushed, matching the color of her dress. Amelia asked Gray, what's wrong? She said he usually didn't think about it like like that? Gray replied, nothing, and suggested they go put the kids to bed. Aria said she'd take Stella. Gray said he'd take Lutz and Nina. Amelia asked if she could put Nina to bed. Aria said, of course. Amelia picked Nina up and carried her into the room. Theo started pushing Isuka out of the room. Gray thought Amelia had completely given up. Aria said the babies usually always slept with Gray. Aria asked if Amelia and Nina could sleep in her room tonight. Gray said, if Amelia doesn't mind, then okay. Amelia replied, of course she does. Aria called Amelia to follow her into the room. Amelia was very nervous about spending the night with the baby. Before going out, Amelia called out to Gray. He asked, what's wrong? Amelia replied that she just wanted to say goodnight. That's all. Gray replied, good night. The next morning, Gray woke up and got up. He adjusted the blanket at Lutz and Stella's. When he went down to the kitchen, 2 girls were already there, Aria and Amelia. Gray wished him good morning and was surprised that they were both already up. Amelia wished him good morning in return and said that Gray, it turns out, likes to sleep. Gray replied that it was warm and cozy to sleep with children. Gray asked how he could help. Aria asked if he could chop vegetables. Amelia said that if she just chopped, she could too. Gray was surprised. He said that Amelia only knew how to use a sword. Amelia said that she would then set out the plates. Gray told Aria that Amelia once cut a board in half with a knife. Aria was surprised. The protagonist noticed 3 packages on the table. He asked if this was a snack. Aria answered yes. She said that she had made some for Amelia too. Gray clarified, at such an early hour? Gray remembered how he once suggested to Aria that they all have lunch together in the city. He approached Aria and apologized for once turning down her snack. Aria replied that it was fine. She always packs a snack just in case. Gray thanked her for her concern. Aria smiled back and said she was grateful. All the children came down for breakfast. After breakfast, the adventurers went to work, and Aria handed out snacks to everyone. Amelia was surprised that she got one too. She asked when Aria had managed to prepare everything. The little ones looked at Amelia with sad eyes. Nina told Amelia that her little sister should come again. Stella said goodbye. Amelia replied that she would definitely come again. She said, Aria, thanks for the snack. Aria replied that she had fun with her. She would look forward to Amelia's visit, especially her interesting stories. Gray thought Amelia was acting like she had done something awkward. Aries looked strange too. He decided that they needed to talk to each other at least once. The 3 adventurers walked through the city. Amelia said it was great to have a family. Gray answered, exactly. Amelia said she also wanted to meet her father, mother, and older sisters. She wasn't sure they wanted her. The protagonist replied that he didn't think so. Amelia's father was an aristocrat from the same area. She was supposed to marry like her sister, but she didn't want to and ran away from home. Amelia and Kasia had been friends since childhood and became closer than sisters. When Amelia left home, Kasia followed her. Amelia said that it was time for her and Gray to say goodbye. She apologized for visiting so suddenly. Gray replied that it was no problem. They always welcomed guests, especially children. Amelia waved and said that they would meet at the guild. Gray turned to Aries and said that it was time for them to go too. Aries apologized. He asked what the relationship was between Gray and Amelia. The protagonist wondered why everyone was so interested in this. Aries wondered if Gray could be a polygamist. 6 days had passed since Aries became an adventurer. Every day he completed various quests, against goblins, against tree monsters, against orcs, against robbers and criminals. Sasha was surprised that the rank and difficulty of the request didn't match. It's not uncommon to accidentally encounter a powerful demon on the road, but Sasha looked very surprised every time. Aries skillfully fought enemy humans, but his first battle with humans was much more difficult than with demons. Aries attended lectures to learn how to distinguish medicinal herbs and sell the materials. Such knowledge is crucial for an adventurer. Thanks to it, he began earning a daily income. But Aries wasn't the only one growing and developing. Isuka had broken the habit of closing his eyes while using a sword. He began moving and keeping an eye on his opponent. Theo managed to manifest her magic. She asked about her lack of understanding of what she was doing. The protagonist thought that this was truly beyond his imagination. Theo had achieved great skill in a short time, despite having only begun training recently. Gray was delighted with the progress of both children, but he was beginning to have confused thoughts about them soon becoming adventurers. Now Aries was reporting to Sasha about an orc he had stumbled upon by chance. Sasha accepted everything. Gray said everything was fine and suggested they go home. Aries agreed. Suddenly, Gansus appeared, called out to Gray, and asked, will Aries truly become an adult if he only fulfills requests to exterminate goblins? He claimed they were already killing orcs at that point. Gray asked Gansus if he'd completed the first stage of orc extermination. The protagonist mockingly congratulated Gansus. Gray tossed something into Gansus's hands, and Gansus looked surprised. When he opened the bag, he saw the head of an orc general. He was startled and threw the head aside. Gray decided that next time he should toss a manticore's head. Aries and Gray left the guild. Gray noticed 2 white doves on the tiles. He told Aries that he remembered he had important business to attend to, so he needed to stop somewhere on his way home. Gray told Aries to return home alone. Aries was surprised but answered well. Perhaps his life with Aries had come to an end. Somewhere in the city, the protagonist met an informant. The informant greeted Gray. He said Gray had been walking for a long time, and time was running out. Gray asked what the informant had learned. The informant replied that, firstly, the orphanage in Kodar no longer existed. The trading stalls of the Filu company had taken its place. Gray asked again, the Filu trading company? He remembered that Filu had been a prominent merchant in this country, but Gray had heard that the merchant and his wife had died in an accident several years ago. He didn't know the details of the accident, but a relative had now taken over as head of the company. But the accident had raised serious suspicions. Gray said that wealthy merchants often opened shops in other countries. The informant answered, is that so? Gray said he was more interested in information about the children who lived in that orphanage. The informant replied that all the children were alive and well, although they had been enslaved in Storia. He asked the protagonist if he had managed to avoid the worst news. Gray was surprised and said that slavery was forbidden in Storia. The informant replied that nobles and some clergy in Storia secretly kept slaves, but officially everything was forbidden. Gray asked where to look for these evil people who kept children as slaves. The informant joked that the protagonist wanted to deal with them. He explained that the slave company was called Xanus. One of the nobles was a common merchant, but he quietly began offering slaves to the nobles in exchange for illegal goods. The protagonist repeated the name of the company, Xanus. The informant reported that it seemed the owner had fled the country. Gray asked why such a person would flee the country. The informant replied that a coup had occurred in Storia. Gray was surprised. A coup d'etat? Storia had a group of holy knights who were unrivaled among ordinary warriors. The only one who distributed them was a knight named Rondi. If there were many such men in the country, it wouldn't be difficult to stage a coup d'etat. Gray asked what happened to the holy knights. The informant replied that more than half the knights, led by Raisin, were the organizers of the coup. When dignitaries gathered in Storia, the holy knights accompanying them suddenly drew their swords and took control of the cathedral. It happened suddenly. Gray was surprised that the informant spoke in such detail, as if he had seen everything himself. The informant laughed. He said that merchants closely connected to the executed elite were also becoming targets for execution. Gray replied, I see. So, illegal slave owners were also in danger? He said he didn't care what happened to Storia. He asked for details about the damn slave owner. The informant replied that the slave owner had moved to this country with only what he could fit. Gray was surprised. He asked if there were children among his personal belongings. This coincidence would only play into his hands. The informant replied that there were children, and the main child was that very boy. The hero's family is a special asset to the slave owner. Gray asked if the slave owner knew that the bishop and Aries had arrived in Bastok, and that the coup d'etat was connected to the hero. There was only one reason to perceive this as a moral obligation. Gray wondered if he should just wait, but that didn't suit him. Would it be impolite not to meet the slave trader? He had come to this city himself. Gray smiled wickedly. The informant asked if the protagonist was satisfied with the information he'd received. Gray answered and handed over the rest of the money. The informant replied that he'd await further requests. Gray said he had some information he needed to find. The protagonist was walking home, thinking that there were only 3 wagons with Xanus, the servants, and the guards. That's only 12 people, including 5 children. Too many to flee the country. The informant found out the route the wagons were taking, but he said that if the wagons changed their route, he wouldn't be held responsible. Gray was willing to add 50 gold coins for this information. It wasn't a cheap service, but Gray was willing to do anything to save the children. Xanus was to collect his personal funds from here and return. The protagonist arrived at the house where the Valkyries lived. Aria was surprised by his arrival. Gray apologized for the unexpected visit and said he needed her advice. Aria suggested they go to the meeting room. On the way, she told everyone that Gray had arrived. When everyone had gathered in the office, Gray said he wanted to rent a carriage from the girls. Aria said that the protagonist now looked like a robber who had attacked merchants. Gray was surprised, right? The girls smiled and said that was typical of Gray. Amelia said that she would have the carriage ready by tomorrow morning, and asked them to wait. Gray thanked her. He said that lately he had to rely on Amelia a lot. He said thank you very much and asked them to contact him if they needed anything. Amelia replied that she would do so next time. She closed her eyes and asked what she could ask for. Gray told her not to overdo it with her wishes. Everyone was surprised. They all ran to Amelia and started asking in turn what happened between them. Everyone hoped that everything had gone smoothly. Amelia tried to explain that everyone had misunderstood. Only the protagonist didn't understand what she was talking about. He headed home. The children from the orphanage were alive. He decided he could take Aries with him when he went to Xanus, but he didn't want Storia's followers to reveal his whereabouts. He preferred to deal with everything alone. The problem was, he wouldn't be able to return home tomorrow. That meant he needed to get some real rest today. Gray loudly declared that he was home. The response was, welcome back. He was a hero, kind and strong. He had an unbending will that couldn't be broken by any adversity. He had the courage to face any enemy. He was a man admired almost every day. Gray was the name of a boy growing up in the village. He admired heroes and dreamed of becoming an adventurer. Gray was 9 years old. He held a dagger in his hand and shouted at the wolf to stay away from him. A man stood nearby behind a tree, watching everything. He knew the beast would simply devour the boy. Better to think about your own money than about someone else's child. This boy isn't worth a penny to save. Children are often attacked and killed by monsters. The wolf lunged at the boy. Gray covered his face with his hands and closed his eyes in fear. One blow and the monster was dead. This blow was dealt by the man who had been watching everything. He thought he was too lazy to bother killing the monster, but he simply couldn't leave the boy to his fate. Killing one forest wolf would be easy. Gray opened his eyes and was shocked. A whole pack of wolves emerged from the forest. The warrior thought he was a fool. He decided it was the poor man's bad luck, but Gray was sitting on the ground, terrified. The warrior said he had run away too late and rushed to attack. He killed several wolves, and the rest fled back into the forest. The warrior exhaled and said that the boy was saved. He sat down on a stone and said that he almost gave up his soul to God. You shouldn't get involved in things you're not used to. He said that if he brought the fangs of these wolves, he could buy a drink tonight. Gray approached the warrior and apologized. The warrior asked why the boy was still there. The warrior told the boy to return to the village. If he was attacked again, he couldn't count on the warrior's help again. The warrior thought the boy had the look of a bad person. Gray said loudly, "Thank you very much," and bowed deeply. He said his name was Gray, and he really wanted to hear the name of his savior. The warrior replied that he was a D-rank adventurer, and his name was Rando. The warrior said the boy didn't need to remember his name because they would never meet again. The warrior stood up and went to collect the fangs. That was the moment Gray decided to become an adventurer. The moment when he was attacked by a monster that made him prepare for death. He remembered for the rest of his life that back which had stood up to monsters to save a stranger. The back of a man who had no thought of his own danger. Then Gray decided that he would definitely become a hero like that.